Hey everyone, this is another Anark live stream. And I'm pretty sure I nailed it first try. Did I nail it first try? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We're doing it. We are doing it. Now I gotta share the link out to people and stuff. Let's go grab it. There we go. At least a good start. People showing up. Yeah, good morning. For me, it's good afternoon, but you know, I feel you on that. You were watching Modern Anarchism Part 3? Awesome. Fantastic. I'm glad you made it to Part 3. A lot of people don't necessarily make it to Part 3. Well, you caught me live now, James. Here I am. Witness. It's Anark in the flesh. Is that what people say? I think that's what people say. We're about to see how effective it is for me to just go on Twitter and say, I'm live now, and just see how many people will click through. Instead of being like, today I'm doing one of my special live streams. I hope you join me. Or like, no pitch, just I'm live now. We're going to see if that works. I suspect it'll work. We'll find out, I guess. So yeah, hopefully the live stream doesn't crash like it did last time. I might close off some things here just so I don't have to deal with any lag. Yeah, you're so early that I'm still in this, starting period of the live stream where I haven't even started like answering questions or anything. Hi, Sim Not Sam. You should probably attend your final class before spring break. Just saying. Just saying. Am I going to be doing another joint stream anytime soon? You mean like the one I did with Andrewism? I mean, if so, I would be down to do another one, but there's not one planned at the moment. Hello, neo-trombones. Is that what that says? And neo-trombones? Oh, neo-trombonus? I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to give you all the 5 easy steps to social revolution today. That's all it takes. You just do the 5 steps, problem solved. Come to Brazil. Unfortunately, I don't have the money to travel to Brazil, but if you just want to send me a bunch of money, maybe I'll go to Brazil. Do live streams from Brazil. Hey, everyone. Anark here, live from Brazil. So we got a few questions going here. What is my position on taxation? So the thing about taxation is it's not really something you're going to avoid while you live in a state society. And that's because taxes are one of your only ways of actually funding broader social programs. So taxation is a sort of holding maneuver against the violence of hierarchy in society to maintain the basic needs that everyone has to have access to. So you'll notice that in general, taxes are supposed to go towards things which serve the general welfare. And that's not always the case, obviously. I mean, I don't think I need to belabor the point that many of our taxes are just used in order to expand the power of hierarchy and not to fund the social services that we all need. However, in a capitalist and state society, and really just in any state society, you should expect to see taxation. And pretty much if you have a state society, you're going to need taxation to fund all the things which people need in society, especially if you are functioning under capitalism, where corporations not only don't care about what happens to the people, they actively want to deprive the people of any sort of social services, because every amount of healthcare and vacation and maternity leave and all of those things that are offered to people in society, the less deprived that people are, and therefore the less that corporations are able to openly exploit them and exploit their labor more generally. Corporations, or rather capitalist entities more generally, they rely on the deprivation of the masses, because more deprived workers are easier to pay worse and give less benefits. So corporations not only aren't going to provide those things to you in society, they are actively going to fight back against the providing of those things, precisely because it makes it harder for them to operate as capitalist entities. So taxation is, maybe not the best way of redistributing things. In fact, obviously, given that I'm an anarchist, I think that we should want to have a voluntary and horizontal society. But insofar as we have a hierarchical society, taxes not only are going to continue, we should desire to see taxes raised on the rich in order to pay for the social services which they explicitly do not want. So in a sense, taxing the rich is a form of soft class warfare within the context of the state. Nice. I got the first donation of the stream, $10 from Hey Sabi, and they say, Anarch stream? Fine, take my money. Wow, usually people ask questions in those donations, but I'd appreciate it, just giving me money. I mean, I'll take it. Wanon says, also taxes make capitalists and rentists cry, so that's good. Yeah, there's a reason why that's the case. So Conrad asks, hey, Anark, what are your thoughts on time banking? I listened to a Moneyless Society pod about it. It seems like a solid transitional step. Yeah, I think that time banking is probably a pretty effective way to transition to decommodification within the scale of capitalism. And the reason I say that is because in capitalism, what you see is people develop very transactional mentalities. That is to say that if they give something, they want something in return. And that can be really hard to overcome when you're trying to undergo a sort of revolutionary horizontal movement. And it would be nice if you could just set up a full-on gift economy, but I think that time banks are ideal insofar as that they kind of balance these two needs. They are the beginning of a process of decommodification, and yet they also kind of satiate this desire that a lot of people might have in a capitalist society for some form of direct remuneration or transaction for the things that they've done. It's just that they don't need that transaction at every single juncture. Oh, Kitty, what are you doing? The cats are being goblins today, so we'll see what happens with that. I mean, they might like step on a key or something and end the stream. I couldn't tell you. You just gonna hang out here with me, Morticia? If you hang out, you gotta not screw things up. Okay. Wait. Okay, you're adorable. Everybody can see how adorable you are. We get it. We understand. Oh, okay. Okay, she's being ridiculous off camera. She just walked up and stole something off of the desk and carried it away, and she's looking at me like, yeah, now what are you going to do? You going to pay attention to me now? I stole this thing. So let's see. Confused Lefty. Have you watched Dune 2? I was thinking the whole time, if Fremen had horizontal power structures, the movie wouldn't have existed. I have not seen it. However, I have read like the first 5 books. So I pretty much know everything that happened in the movies and what's going to happen in the following movies insofar as they release them. I don't know how old Morticia is. She was a street cat that Sonia took in. If any of you know who Sonia is, she's Anarchist on Twitter, and I've been taking care of her 2 cats here in the apartment for a little while. What should you and your affinity group do in the now? Wubsy asks. Well, I guess that depends on your conditions. That's something you're going to have to analyze yourself, looking at the conditions of the society that surrounds you. A good place to start is usually some form of study group or form of a popular education program, tabling zines and materials and talking with people on the street about things. That's often a good place to start, but it's really going to depend on what is happening in your conditions. You know, yeah, are you experiencing a lot of police violence? Then it's probably good to organize people who are the victims of that police violence. You know, are you experiencing transphobic violence? Then you probably need to develop some forms of defense against transphobic bigots. You know, are you experiencing extreme capitalist exploitation? Then you should probably start developing unions. You know, this is something that anarchists are always going to have to be able to answer within their own context. And so I would advise you to look at what the hierarchical power structures are around you and then begin to understand how it is that they maintain their rulership within your region and what you can do to undermine that rulership. B asks, thoughts on streaming on Twitch? That sounds like a lot of effort to establish and build another platform. Like, that's pretty well my universal response to when people are like, why don't you do stuff on this platform or that platform? It's like, because it's hard to develop a new platform. You know, it takes a lot of time to get people over to that platform and to establish it. And furthermore, I don't really want to do a bunch of live streams. I've pretty well limited myself to doing one of them a month. So I don't know that it would be better for me to stream on Twitch than just here on YouTube, where pretty much all of my followers are. So I see people here talking about Frank Herbert and his politics and whether he was an anarchist and what he thought was going on. I saw Long Defiant says that, you know, he believes that humanity's basic state is to continually return to feudalism. I don't know if that is what Frank Herbert's saying. What you see with his analysis or with his conception of the golden path, what Paul is doing is not like returning to some basic state of nature that everybody is naturally tending towards. Instead, Paul is, I think, setting up a sort of cautionary tale. He's creating the absolute worst conceivable tyranny which could exist in order to teach humanity that it should despise tyranny. It's almost like another Butlerian jihad in the context of the Dune universe. Sorry, I realize as I talk about this that the people who have only seen the movies, what goes on is this is like huge spoilers. So disregard everything I just said. Paul is the good guy. Paul is the good guy. Yeah. No problems there. No complications. Never mind. Just forget everything I just said. Do you think it's valuable to convince conservative Christians to read Tolstoy? Yes, absolutely. In fact, that might be highly effective if you can actually get them to read any work of Tolstoy, which is more explicitly anarchist, because he actually wrote theory. What is it? The kingdom of God is within you. I think that would be really great if you could get Christians to actually read that. That would be fantastic. But good luck. You're going to probably find that the majority of people just don't want to read. But I would say if you can get them to read, that would be a fantastic place to get conservative Christians to read, or really just any Christian that may not be down with anarchism. I think that it might expose the anarchic center of Jesus' teachings. Ethan says, you've said before that you don't believe in personal boycotts as a useful tactic, but do you still try to purchase sustainable products or avoid buying useless junk like mass-produced trash? No, not really. I think I just kind of buy whatever I think is necessary, whatever I need. That being said, I am not very consumerist as a person. I don't really consume much. That's not really my vibe. I don't have a lot of money to begin with. And furthermore, even with the money I do have, I'm not really buying very much, if you get what I'm saying. But I think that, in a general sense, the personal boycott is the wrong approach. I think that we live in a society where people are far too likely to use individualistic solutions to systemic problems. And personal boycotts are a good example of that. Confused Lefty says, what are your main issues with Marxism? In a general sense, if what we mean by Marxism is just the ideas of Marx, I actually don't have huge issues. I actually agree with Marx on most things. If there is anything that I think Marx got wrong, it is that Marx was too economically reductionist. I think that he was over-focused on the economic question, which is fine, because at the time that was radical, right? Nobody was really focused on the economic question. It was sort of obscured within the discussions of the time. And so it was very radical to bring economics to the fore and analyze and critique capitalism. However, I think that Marx left out so much that it led to extremely economically reductionist views in the people who followed Marx's ideas. So I think that was a big mistake that Marx made, was over-focusing on economics. And it is not entirely clear whether he believed that economics had absolute primacy or whether that was just the outcome of his focus on economics. Like, whether he actually was an economic reductionist or he spent all his time talking about economics and therefore it appeared as if he was an economic reductionist. Now, I got to say, with having some understanding of dialectics more broadly, it's unlikely Marx was actually an economic reductionist, and this is somewhat present in his conception of the base and the superstructure. However, I still think that the base and the superstructure does not properly understand what's going on. There are not, two interacting aspects of society, one which you could call the base as to suggest that it has some form of primacy, and the superstructure, which is the outcome of the base and then reinforces the base. I don't think that's the right way to understand it. I think the right way to understand it is that there is a complex web of mutually dependent and interdependent features that hold up the hierarchical structure of society. And economics are one of those. You might say that they have a very high weight in that network, but they are absolutely not the only or primary thing to look at. In a lot, they are something that is nearly universal. So that makes it very useful to organize around class politics, because you're going to find that people are struggling against capitalism in nearly every single example that you could go look at across the planet, because capitalism has become hegemonic. So it's powerful then to organize people around class politics, but that does not mean that just because it's useful, that is therefore the actual crux of all power structures. And we see this in the creation of all kinds of power structures after a variety of different class conflicts, which did not take into account the more intersectional or broad spanning nature of how hierarchy functioned. And therefore, they sort of dropped the ball on these very important issues. You know, we see a lot of homophobia and a variety of different kinds of bigotry and a national chauvinism occurring in a lot of these examples, because they didn't fight back against these simultaneously as they fought back against capitalism. I think that's one thing. I think another thing is that this conception, this maybe over focus on class politics as they relate to the means of production and the development of the means of production, led to a reductionist view of what actually leads to the development and changes in society, such that they over focused on the development of the means of production and thought that if the means of production just developed to some sufficient level, that this would lead directly to transformations of social conditions and transformations of society as such, and would lead to the conditions for the negation of that system. I actually think that that was a big mistake in their conception. I think that what you see is the more developed that social systems become, they actually become more ingrained and more difficult to oust. The only way that they develop the negation of their structures is under the conditions that they create a displeased, begrudged underclass, or I shouldn't even say underclass, a begrudged class of people that somehow both have power and are displeased with how the system functions. But if you don't develop that, if you created a begrudged underclass, but they don't have any power, then it doesn't matter. They will just be subjugated for hundreds or thousands of years. And if they have power, but they're not begrudged, then they're not going to do anything to transform the system. So I think one of the big reasons we went from capitalism, or from feudalism to capitalism, was because the bourgeois rose as a class that was both begrudged against the power of the feudal lords, or rather monarchy more broadly, and they had power to actually change things. And I think what we're seeing is that systems of power, systems of hierarchy, as they develop, actually get really good at disempowering the begrudged classes and empowering the non-begrudged classes. So I do not take for granted that this system is going to develop itself out of existence, nor that it is going to develop the organic constituency that will overthrow it. I think that it will take conscious action of organizers and revolutionaries to transform those conditions from what they were beforehand, and that's not just going to take place through agitation. That is only going to take place through the conscious development of, contrasting horizontal power structures, which could actually do the work of overthrowing the previous system. So, yeah, there you go. That's just kind of some main thoughts. Those are some broader things. You mentioned his definition of the state, but Marx barely even has a definition of the state. I think this is one of the weakest aspects of Marx. Marx doesn't seem to have a very solid understanding of what the state is and what it arises from. And you'll notice this economic reductionism even weaves its way into his and Engels' understanding of the state, such that they seem to think that the state is that entity by which one class imposes its will over another. Now, first of all, this is kind of an incoherent understanding of the state. If that's the case, then all kinds of things you wouldn't want to define as a state would be called a state. But also, the state does not only exist as a body to maintain economic conditions. So here, once again, we're back to the economic reductionism. And it's not clear, once again, whether Marx was economically reductionist by focus or by accident, but it's also not super relevant because almost everybody who called themselves a Marxist afterwards was an economic reductionist. XL Step says, in a socialist society, would you be okay with a mix between worker-owned businesses and state-owned businesses in which some businesses are owned by the workers and some are nationalized? I think nationalization is just absolutely the wrong path. I don't think it can lead you towards socialism. In fact, I think that if you had complete nationalization, you would have capitalism still. You would just have what's called state capitalism. Changing your boss is not changing the conditions of capitalism. That all it does is it alienates your power to a different group of rulers. Now, instead of just being the capitalist or the bourgeois class, you essentially create a system of rulership where the administrators of the state become your rulers. And that is not escaping capitalism. Now, worker-owned enterprise gets you closer. It begins to eliminate worker alienation from the means of production. And so that's why I consider it part of a necessary mixed program as we move forward. But the mixture, in my mind, is the mixture between worker-owned cooperatives and fully decommodified, decentralized, direct distribution economies. So. Rian says, how do you see an anarchist society existing for settlers in North America in relation to indigenous peoples getting their lands back? Yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question because what land back actually means differs depending on which indigenous people you're talking to. For some indigenous people, it means putting land back in the or into the ownership of the states, the Cherokee state and Choctaw state and so on. For other indigenous peoples, it means recommoning. It means actually eliminating ownership of the land. Land back would then therefore just mean eliminating property ownership. For some others, it would actually mean putting into collective ownership of indigenous people. That is to say, making them stewards. And you might have heard that kind of thing before. And for yet more indigenous people, it actually means creating collective ownership of everyone that is on the land, and therefore creating what you might call usufruct ownership. And I've met indigenous people who believe any number of these. So I think that really can't be simplified to say what land back means in this context. But I do think that there are some of these that anarchists or people with a horizontal or libertarian socialist perspective are going to be more conducive towards. Obviously, people with an anarchist or libertarian socialist perspective are going to be for decommodifying the land or eliminating ownership of land, collectivizing ownership of the land, or using usufruct relations. But anarchists and libertarian socialists are obviously not going to be in favor of handing land to the states because they're still just states. This idea that some people have, I think, that returning land to the states themselves is going to therefore create like responsible stewardship of the land. To me, it reads as being very fetishizing, as tokenizing of indigenous people. It's kind of trying to, I think, perceive them as being some kinds of superior, special sorts of humans that are not victim to the same conditioning, psychological conditioning effects of hierarchy as everyone else. Everyone, every human being is victim to the psychological and social conditioning effects of hierarchical power systems and power structures, and that includes indigenous people. So the idea that land back is a healthy thing to do, or rather, land back is healthy when we give that land to tribal states who are then going to nationalize it, that is a liberatory process. I think it's only liberatory by comparison to perhaps, say, the United States or Canada or something owning those same lands, or the capitalists owning them. So it's better by degree, but it's not, in my opinion, a path towards creating a liberatory society and a liberatory form of ownership over land. I think the Zapatistas are taking the correct approach, which is to say there is usufruct usage of land, but there's literally no claim of ownership over land. To me, I think that would be the ideal form of land back. However, in the conditions that we're given, we can't just decommodify the land, eliminate ownership, you know? For example, Cooperation Tulsa owns 2.5 acres of land. We can't just say, and now nobody owns it. You know, that would be only in our imaginations. You know, there's always going to be someone who will have control over that plot of land. If it won't be us, then it'll be handed to one entity and then to another entity and to another entity. We can't actually eliminate the legalistic, structure of ownership over the land insofar as that we have not created autonomous power. And you can't really create autonomous power until you've created a sufficient horizontal power structure to maintain yourself, as opposed to the prevailing power structures that exist, such as the Zapatistas, right? They can decide what they want to do with their land. They can decide what kind of ownership or non-ownership that you might have over the land. However, insofar as that you're just this small contingent where you only have 2.5 acres, you don't really get to make that kind of decision. So it's very complicated. It's very complicated. However, what I do think is that whatever horizontal power structures that are developed and whatever ownership of the land is developed, that should be done in cooperation with those state structures if that is conducive, if that can be done. And it should also be done with the conception in mind that we're trying to restore native ecosystems. We're trying to restore indigenous land management practices. And we should also be trying to cooperate with broader indigenous communities themselves. So yeah, it's very complicated. Knowledge and Defense says, I see Marxists claim that socialism is defined not just by worker control, but also abolition of commodities and wage labor, replacing them with either labor vouchers or a gift economy. It's okay if you want to define socialism that way, but that's not really historically what people meant by socialism when they used that term. Now, it just really depends. You know, that word socialism sometimes is more or less just completely interchangeable with the word communism for some people. And that's, you know, partially because of distortions and also partially because of the misunderstandings of Lenin, who redefined lower stage communism as socialism, or rather sometimes seemed to define the dictatorship of the proletariat as being socialism. But historically that is, or the dictatorship of the proletariat was not just what Marx meant by socialism, and it's not really at all what most people meant by socialism. So in general, the largest, broadest understanding of what socialism meant when we had world-spanning revolutionary movements was indeed worker ownership of the means of production. And that's why you can see that in socialist movements, that's exactly what people fought for. They did not fight for nationalization campaigns. They did not fight for, when they said they were socialists, they were not saying they were for the immediate decommodification of society and the elimination of the market. They meant that they were fighting for worker control of the means of production. That being said, if somebody wants to use the word socialism that way, go for it. I just think it's a little bit confusing, and it's probably going to confuse people reading theory historically. Knowledge and Defense follows up. I define socialism by how much things are owned in a social manner. Do you consider Rojava and the EZLN socialist? Are there quotes from anarchist theorists defining socialism? Yeah, I mean, that's like an acceptable way to define socialism. Again, I just say that socialism is worker ownership of the means of production, but I would also be open to a conception of socialism that just means social ownership of the means of production through forms of collective management like workers' councils. As far as do I consider Rojava an EZLN socialist, I think that Rojava is doing its best to move towards worker ownership of the means of production, but I think at the moment it wouldn't really be accurate to say that that's what they have. As far as the EZLN, yes, absolutely. They indeed have achieved worker ownership of the means of production. They've even begun into that process of decommodifying things like land and base necessities like agricultural products. And Piraha says, the definition of socialism is not static. To say we have to stick with the original definition is dogmatic. Dogmatism in the sense that you think there's only one correct form of socialism. Yeah, no, I think this is a completely erroneous way to understand this. Words, we use them, we define them in order to be able to communicate with one another. So, for example, if me and you say, hey, we both want pizza. I want to go get pizza. Okay. And then we're like, yeah, pizza. Let's get pizza. And then you're like, okay, well, I'll go pick it up. And you go and you pick it up. But what you bring back is tacos. And I say, well, I thought we agreed that we both wanted pizza. And you go, oh, when I say pizza, I mean tacos. Like, no, that's not okay. I'm not dogmatic for saying, for still contending that pizza means pizza and not tacos. I think that actually what we see is the distortion and alteration of the definitions of words is one of the most reliable methods of charlatans and manipulators. So people who want to manipulate and want to accumulate power, they love distorting the meanings of words. That's one of their big methods. I think authoritarian leftists do this more than almost any other kinds of people. So they don't want, when workers fight a revolution for worker control of the means of production, which they take to be what socialism is, and then people get into power and they say, well, socialism, it no longer means that. Socialism doesn't mean worker control of the means of production. Socialism is just this vague concept of socializing the profits of your system. So, if you socialize profits, that's socialism. That is deception. That is being a charlatan. That is essentially having tried to jump into the driver's seat of a movement that didn't want what you wanted and redefining the word in order to be what is beneficial to you, not beneficial to the people who fought a revolution for the purpose of a certain thing. Also, keeping definitions of words somewhat static is something you need to do in order for people to understand the theory they're reading, right? Like, there's wiggle room, don't get me wrong, right? Like words can kind of have this blurry area of different things which all fit well enough for us to do the same formal kinds of analysis. But that doesn't mean that they're completely open and flexible to be redefined as we please, and that anybody who doesn't think so is dogmatic, right? Because it leads to people going back and reading theory from 100 years ago, and they see these words occur, and they're confused about what the authors actually meant when they used these words. Because now that we've distorted the words so much, now that we have, made them superfluous, now it's not clear. Somebody back in the day in the late 1800s, when they said they were a communist, they meant they were stateless, classless, and they believed in a moneyless society of direct distribution and decommodification. So now we've got this definition of communism, which just is when the state does everything. Well, that's been extremely harmful. And that now leads to people going back and reading all those theorists who are talking about wanting communism. And now they think they mean they want the state to do everything. That's been extremely harmful. It's made people less able to understand theory they used to read. And might I add, it has benefited a variety of charlatans and power hoarders and authoritarians. So absolutely do not agree. I do not think it's quote unquote dogmatism to have consistent definitions for words. DT gives $2 and says, thoughts on Benjamin Tucker? He had ANCAP vibes. Actually, I've not read Benjamin Tucker thoroughly. I've skimmed certain pieces of his, but it's interesting because I have definitely heard certain people make that claim. But when I skimmed his work and I was kind of searching for certain keywords and looking for him talking about certain topics, Benjamin Tucker was not an ANCAP in the sense that he did not support private ownership of the means of production. That is to say, he didn't support the perpetuation of capitalism, but he was not anti-market. He was not a market abolitionist. So sometimes he, seems like he might have some kind of ANCAP vibes, but it seems to me like that is diffused by reading the broader context of things he's saying elsewhere. But I would want to read more Benjamin Tucker before I weighed in more heavily on that. Confused lefty. Yeah, socialism is when the state does stuff. If the state does a whole lot of stuff, then it's communism. Yeah, this is where, unfortunately, the definition of these words has ended up. And I think that socialists and communists are not being, quote unquote, dogmatic to push back against these understandings of those words. Mel, ethics aside, using your understanding of how power structures work, what is your step-by-step guide to accumulating centralized power? Well, it is largely about deception, threat of violence, and use of violence, and it is about monopolization of power. So it's about taking opportunities where they arise and using them to concentrate power in the hands of a very small group of people. I think that authoritarian leftists and fascists both have very clear and effective methods for monopolizing power, and it generally boils down to either find a movement that already exists and then co-opt it. That's the authoritarian leftist method, right? Like everybody else does all of the work, and then you jump into the driver's seat at the last minute and claim, responsibility, or you claim credit for what took place. And then what fascists do is they essentially take pre-existing bigotries and hatreds and splits between the masses, and they use these to turn them against one another such that they can get into positions of authority. So you either have the outside or the inside strategy. The outside strategy is what authoritarian leftists use, and in general, fascists use the inside strategy. So fascists join the military, they become senators, they, get into positions of power. Whereas authoritarian leftists, even though, yes, they do that sometimes, more often they stay outside and they try to concentrate power within the movements, and where they try to take credit for what the movements are doing, even though they usually have had very little to do with the building of that movement. But looks like we've got a couple more donations here. One from Sam for $10. Sam says, the older I get, the more inclined I am toward intentional communities as a prefigurative path to building multi-generational radical communities. Thoughts on the potential, positive and negative? So the thing is I don't think intentional communities are bad by any means. And I think I agree with you that they are highly prefigurative. But I think that one of the problems of intentional communities, they become very separated from the rest of society. They become very isolated. They often end up pretty far out into the wilderness. They don't end up being integrated very much. And they are almost never actually integrated into movements. I think that's a big problem. And the intentional communities also don't seem to develop strong ties with one another very often. So what you don't get this sort of these internally reinforcing communities between the intentional communities. You just get them inside the intentional communities. So I guess what I'm saying is intentional communities have a tendency to become very provincial, to only worry about their own problems rather than trying to work together with radical or revolutionary social movements. That being said, I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying people shouldn't do them, but they should be part of a larger tapestry of methods, I believe. And if they are going to be made radical and revolutionary, there need to probably be work by people that are more integrated with broader revolutionary and radical social movements to begin tying them in with those social movements. I will get back to the normal chat stuff, but I'll address the next donation. This one is $20 from Jake Frazier. He says, "Hi, Anarch. What do you think of regenerative forms of agriculture, such as permaculture? Do you think anarchists should prioritize creating community gardens as a mean of providing dong for the people and advancing of providing..." I don't know what you intended there, providing for the people and advancing autonomy. Permaculture should absolutely be used as the concepts of permaculture should be utilized in whatever kind of agricultural or ecological projects that we end up carrying out. That being said, the permaculture is not necessarily always good at establishing scale. It's often good at establishing density, but then harvesting can be kind of difficult sometimes. It can be a little more fiddly to achieve harvesting permacultural methods because everything often tends to kind of get all mixed together and you kind of have to pull it apart at various times of year as you harvest different fruits and vegetables. But yes, permaculture, I've heard this a lot, and I think I more or less agree. Permaculture is the Western rediscovery of indigenous farming methods. So I absolutely support the use of permaculture. And seems like there's heavy overlap between permaculture and indigenous farming methods. James asks, how are you able to become so articulate on the fly? I often try to explain concepts to people and fumble over my words when trying to get my point across. If I could recommend anything, it's that you read and write about the topics. Engage in them more and more and more. I think that generally the inarticulacy comes from not having a lot of experience talking about it, not having addressed a whole bunch of different viewpoints, not having sort of pre-prepared responses, which are on hand, and to some degree, usually stems from a lack of self-confidence in what you're going to say. Because I find, for example, I'm less articulate when I'm constantly having to think through the implications of what I'm saying, and I keep backtracking in my mind, and that makes me stumble. It kind of makes me stumble and question the words that I'm saying and which words I'm using, and what might some person interpret this as opposed to what another person. The more clarity that you achieve, the better you begin to understand the exact words that you want to use and the exact form of the arguments you want. You'll get better and better at it. It'll start to just kind of come off the hip. So if I were to say what makes me able to articulate my thoughts in this sense, it's that I've written about it a lot, I've read about it a lot, and I have practiced articulating these thoughts a lot. Oh. Chat just refreshed, despite that I did not want that to happen. Also, we got a lot of concurrent viewers today, 139. That might be the highest we've had. I think maybe we got up to like 150 one time, but we're pretty high up there right now. Confused Lefty says, can an anarchist rise to power in the existing power structures, consolidate power, and then dissolve hierarchical power structures altogether and then establish horizontal structures? Or is the structure too volatile to do that? I don't think it's that it's too volatile. I think that it's developed precisely to not let that happen. There's so many mechanisms inside of hierarchical power structures that are preventing people within them from dissolving those hierarchical power structures and bolstering horizontal power structures. Hierarchical power power and horizontal power are at odds with one another. They are the negation of one another. And therefore, hierarchical power is developed to disempower horizontal power structures and to marginalize the people within the hierarchical power structure that want to develop horizontal power. And furthermore, it's not even about that external pressure on the actors. It is about the actors themselves becoming conditioned, socially, psychologically and socially conditioned. This is something that is just fully understood and fully researched, or rather, I guess not fully understood, but deeply researched by psychology and sociology at this point. People are formed by the environments they are inside of, by the conditions they are surrounded by. There might be some people from time to time that are exceptions to this rule, but there are not enough of those exceptions to the rule to fundamentally transform a hierarchical power structure internally into a horizontal power structure. And insofar as that even takes place for some period of time, it will always be pulled back by later people who end up in that hierarchical power structure, recognizing the ways that they will benefit from the reestablishment of hierarchical power, which they are in a higher position within, essentially, but relatively. But there have been 2 donations. I don't want to miss them. $5. What do you think needs to be done to make more Western anarchists as militant and organized as anarchists in places like Greece, Ukraine, and Russia? So sorry, both of these came, okay. The other one was about permaculture. I already answered that one. So what needs to be done? This kind of fits in with something somebody else was asking. I think it might've been you. You might've been asking kind of a related question, which is like, why aren't Western anarchists often as militant? And I think a big part of it is that, when you live in the imperial core, or when you benefit enormously from a hierarchical power structure, you're going to tend to not want to dismantle it. That's one part of it, but that's not to besmirch anarchists. I think it's also because there's been such an enormous presence of these sort of liberal methods and approaches. This, there's lots of anarchists that are all about civil disobedience and protests, and then they think they're extremely radical for engaging in riots or something, right? Or direct action against police officers. They think they're so radical for that. And I actually think that's less radical than building big confederations of horizontal power structures. Horizontal power structures actually have the possibility to truly threaten hierarchical power at its base, whereas engaging in protest is all just hoping that if you bare your fangs and you shout really loud about how strong you are, that the power structure will be afraid of you and will concede to your demands. But I think what we've seen is that doesn't work. I also think that the anarchists in the West became so enamored with sort of a lifestylist, individualist anarchism. And I know anarchist communities get all up in arms when I bring this up. They hate this word lifestylist, but unfortunately it's real. I've seen so many anarchists that what anarchism is to them is dressing radical and listening to punk music and, being structureless and nomadic and having no place they call home and, trains, jumping on trains and going from place to place and, like forming no permanent connections. That to me is toothless, powerless. That has no ability to transform conditions. That is a youth subculture. And I think that youth subculture caught on in a lot of these Western countries in place of the revolutionary, radical, militant history of anarchism, which was predicated upon creating power structures that could compete with the prevailing power structures with the plan to one day eliminate them. I think that, so with that in mind, a lot of what I'm doing with my work here is trying to reestablish that truly militant, revolutionary understanding of conditions, trying to push aside this more lifestylist, individualist, nomadic, romanticizing that takes place in Western anarchist spaces, trying to push us back into actual militancy, into doing something that could actually threaten the power structure, getting rid of this performative protest politics where all we do is just plan protest after protest after protest and oh my God, somebody threw a brick, incredible. we need to actually begin developing something that is a threat to this power structure. And so that's what I'm trying to do. That's part of what I'm trying to do with the work that I write. And that's part of what I'm trying to develop in the praxis that I carry out in the world. And I hope that more and more of you take that position. I hope more and more of you move out of this lifestylist, romanticizing of nomadism and having no connections to anyone and everything being about the self, and instead begin to understand that you are part of a community, whether you like it or not. You have responsibility to other human beings, whether you like it or not. And the more you embrace that responsibility, the more you develop radical ties of solidarity between other human beings that last, by the way, not ones that just come and go all the time, ones that are real and enduring, the more powerful we will all become in the process, the more possibility we will actually have to dismantle hierarchical power rather than perpetually living under it and trying to find new subcultures that make us feel a little relief at living under this oppressive hierarchical society. I'm not saying it's bad to develop those subcultures, okay, but it is meaningless if it is not developed alongside real, enduring, horizontal power structures built on solidarity and equality of structural power and freedom of our ability to make decisions. We should all be empowered together. That's what will change conditions. All right. Well, John Doe, what would you say are the most legitimate criticisms of anarchism? I think the ones that are most legitimate, I really rarely ever hear. One is that I think that anarchism could possibly lead to a sort of confederation, a confederated like technocracy. Okay. And I know generally a technocracy implies some form of hierarchical power, but I actually think that it's quite possible that if you developed all these council structures that come along with the ability to delegate people doing particular tasks, that there is a pretty decent chance that they would just delegate experts to do all of the tasks. And then what you would get is this sort of, you'd possibly get this sort of worship for expertise, this worship for technical skill, because people don't have that knowledge and they might therefore trust too much to experts, and those experts might get too much planning power such that it would become harder and harder for us to actually intervene and question and criticize the decisions of those expert delegates. I think that's a real possibility that could happen. I also think it's possible that in a horizontal society that you might be able to get a very large group of people together to vote for hierarchy. And I would say that that might be one of the main failure modes of anarchism, is that if you were to get huge consensus for everybody to want some super powerful tyrannical leader for a period of time, kind of like how the Greeks did with their dictators, it's possible that dictator could get power and keep power. And then you would degrade back into a hierarchical power structure in that process. That's part of the reason why I advocate we have to have some sort of big confederated charter that just says that is not allowed. That's one of the only things we're not allowed to do with our horizontal power, is to diffuse and destroy our horizontal power. And I think that would probably be a pretty solid solution to that. These are the ones that first come to mind, however. Knowledge and defense. Wouldn't a solution to the expertise problem you mentioned be just to make education free, better funded, and more easily accessible? Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think that these are like eternal problems. Let me just say more broadly, there is no such thing as a perfect system. Every system, literally every system you could conceivably construct has flaws. And every system contains the seeds of its own destruction. Okay? So when you build a system, what you want to do is build it consciously with safeguards that prevent those particular flaws from running wildly out of control. So like I said, the way to fix the expertise problem is, or rather, sorry, as I said, the way to fix the hierarchy problem or the dictator problem is to basically just say in the charters that everybody agrees to, that's the only thing we're not allowed to do, right? And number two, as you say, the way to fix the expertise problem is just lots of education. You know, if somebody wants to learn about how to do something that the experts know how to do, you, number one, create systems wherein they will be educated up to the point of that expert and therefore able to understand what the expert does and make criticisms and you know, edits to what the expert says. But also at the same time, you want to create a system where it's every expert should be held to the expectation that they will educate others. Okay. If people who aren't educated come to them and want explanation, the expert, remember, is a delegate, not an authority. They serve the people. So that means that the expert should always be in a process of spreading their education and, you know, sort of getting rid of the informal hierarchy they might have over people who don't have their expertise through the process of education. So I think that anybody in an expert position should also be held to that standard, that they also must become an educator. They must spread that knowledge. And when they make proposals, it should come along with brief summaries of pertinent knowledge that led that expert to that proposal. I think that those are the sorts of things that might be fixes for those. Drexel Clayton says, how would you respond to the criticism that anarchism is incapable of defending its revolutionary projects against capitalist reaction? Well, I don't think that any of the examples we have of anarchism failing to defend itself, or rather the majority, the big of the big projects that we might look at, none of those have been because anarchism has been insufficient to meet the needs of the situation. It's almost always been because either A, they didn't have enough people, that is to say, they didn't have enough actual you know, resources in order to resist the incursion of a variety of other forces. And that would have been true of any kind of structure. If a hierarchical power structure had been there with the same number of people and resources, it would have also failed. But also that anarchists, when they had their biggest projects in the early 1900s, were betrayed by their allies. And so the anarchists of history failed to a large degree because they trusted their allies, the authoritarian leftists specifically, too much. So both Ukraine and Spain, the anarchists failed because they trusted the Bolsheviks. In both occasions, the Bolsheviks destroyed the anarchist revolutions. The anarchists had been successfully defending themselves against fascist incursion in the Black Army, the Black Army in Ukraine had pretty well ousted the White Army from Ukraine and even some of Russia. And in Spain, the CNT-FAI had completely ousted the fascists from their region. So in both occasions, they did pretty well against resisting capitalist incursion. They failed in both occasions to predict that their closest, what they thought were their closest allies, were going to straight up try to destroy them in the years following their success against forces of capitalist incursion. Pikachu Man, I'm curious. You are very much against ML and Maoism. What would it take to change your mind? That's the thing is, like, I know the history at this point. So, like, it would take the history transforming. So reality would have to change. But I've read about the actual outcomes in depth. Like, of both examples of the USSR and Maoist China, I've read numerous books about both of them. So I know what happened. So there's no way that I could have my opinion changed about them, because in order for somebody to change my opinion, they'd have to change history. And that can't be done. So also they would have to, or possibly they would have to convince me that hierarchical power is both natural and good. And I don't think that that is conceivably possible. I know too much about the theory. I've seen too many examples. I have both seen it with my own eyes, and I've read way too much history, which demonstrates that a hierarchical power is neither natural nor good. So yeah, at this point, I just know too much. There's no way that somebody could convince me of something for which all evidence seems to demonstrate the contrary, which is essentially that authoritarian leftism is counter-revolutionary. Its purpose is to jump into the driver's seat of revolutions that it did not create, and then essentially transition them into state capitalism rather than socialism. So. Knowledge and Defense, can you elaborate on why you don't see Rojava as socialist as well? Since the reports claim that 75% property is communally owned, 10% co-ops, and most of the rest is personal, as I understand. That's the thing, is I'm pretty confused about what the actual conditions of their economy is. So even though, yeah, your number seemed about 7 to 10% seems to be cooperatives, and then I found certain places where it said, yes, like 3/4 of property is communally owned. But what that seemed to actually be saying is land. So like, it seems like everything that is not that 10% cooperatives is a mixture of private entities, private property, capitalist entities, and nationalization, which, as I've described before, I don't see nationalization as socialist. And then it seems like 3/4 of the property that those private entities own, which is to say there are like corporations, or not corporations per se, but capitalist entities. The land that they're on is owned by the communes and the councils. But even though I understand that those businesses act at the behest of those councils, I don't think that that's enough to qualify them as being socialist. Running a private entity, but under the control of councils, it's still capitalism. It's just regulated capitalism. So I am reticent to call it fully socialist at this point. However, I would say that as the cooperatives become more and more of the economy, and as more and more of those private entities perhaps become cooperatives or are subsumed to particular incentives of the communes, that I would begin to become more and more willing to say that it is socialist. But I just admit that the more I research it, the less I seem to understand exactly what the arrangement of economic details are. I would love to speak with an academic or an expert on Rojava's economy so they could clarify specific details about ownership of land and businesses and the role of the commune in economic management and so on. B Advocate says, I think the polemical distinction between individualist anarchism and social anarchism can keep people from learning useful things from each movement. I disagree. I do not think the distinction is polemical. I think that it's real. I think it's meaningful. I think that when you look at individualist anarchism and social anarchism, though they intertwine and there's a variety of individualist anarchists that come to the same conclusion as social anarchists, individualist anarchism roots more from Stirner and the American individualists than social anarchism, which roots more to people like Bakunin and to some degree Proudhon. Although Proudhon had influence on both the individualist and the social anarchist traditions. However, they're distinct. I mean, they even hold separate values. Social anarchism holds to the values of freedom, equality, and solidarity, whereas individualist anarchism holds to the values of the ego and ownness. So they are different. It's not a polemical distinction. That being said, that doesn't mean that we have to be tribalistic between the two. It doesn't mean that we have to be like, oh, I'm a social anarchist, so I hate individualist anarchists, or, you know, oh, I don't read any individualist anarchist theory because I'm a social anarchist, or vice versa. That's not necessary. In fact, in my work in Modern Anarchism, Part 2, I really lay out how the individualist anarchists, specifically egoists, have a lot of value to contribute to the discussion. And I actually use those two values of the ego and its own as being important values for any society to maintain if they want a anarchic society. That being said, I think that I kind of am on the opposite side here. I think that that distinction is also very useful because it helps people understand the real split that has taken place, or rather the real split that has existed for over 100 years within the movement. So when I talk with normal people, what they describe to me as anarchism, I basically tell them I'm an anarchist. And the reason they explain to me they're not an anarchist is because they think all of anarchism is individualist anarchism. And then I have to explain to them, I'm like, well, no, what you're describing is a kind of anarchism, but it's called individualist anarchism. And there's another kind of anarchism called social anarchism, which is distinctly different. And I'm going to tell you about that. And after I tell them about social anarchism, they're on board. Lots of people discover they were social anarchists already beforehand. And the only thing that kept them from anarchism was that they thought all of anarchism was individualist. And so I also think it's very helpful in that sense to help clarify to people, no, what you're talking about is a form of anarchism, but it's not the only form of anarchism, nor is it the majority form of anarchism. So yeah, just long and short, I disagree. Pin Archives, Anark has his book in the background. I do. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to plug it. Here's my book, A Modern Anarch. Oh, do I got it? Oh, yeah, there we go. A Modern Anarchism, Part 2, Anarchy. This is essentially just the script to A Modern Anarchism, Part 2. Okay, so it's published, but it's got pictures and stuff. Ooh, look at the pictures. See, there we go. That's the pertinent section of that discussion, bridging the unbridgeable chasm. It is about that split between individualist and social anarchism. And note, I'm saying we should bridge the unbridgeable chasm. So I'm not against individualist anarchists, but I think their picture is incomplete. And so what I'm doing is I'm offering the synthesis of the two in Part 2 of Modern Anarchism. Drexel Clayton asks, will you publish a printed version of all the parts of A Modern Anarchism once you finish it? The answer is yes. Keep an ear out on that. I might already have some leads. Also, on the topic of A Modern Anarchism, I'm like 95% done with the script for A Modern Anarchism Part 4. So, expect to hear about progress on that in not too terribly long. Link in bio. Give me a sec. I'll put the link in bio eventually, but definitionist, distribution, modern anarchism, part 2. So yeah, I found it in Google, by the way, by just typing seditionist distribution, a modern anarchism, part 2. And that just brought it up, but I will put it here in the chat. There you go. That's if you want to buy part 2. Part 1 is obviously also on their website. So somebody asked, basically, are you a postmodernist or do I agree with postmodernism? I consider myself what you would call a meta-modernist. So meta-modernism is kind of it's sort of a rejection of the distinction between the two. more accurately, it is about a holistic synthesis between the two, recognizing that they both got some things wrong. That is to say, the analytic and the continental tradition, or modernism, quote unquote, and postmodernism, quote unquote. I think that they both were off base to some significant degree. I am, in a sense, a neo-structuralist, not a post-structuralist. I think that there is such thing as a sort of objective structure to the truth of the universe. Truth is, there is subjective truth, but there is also objective truth. And though we don't have direct access to it, we can get closer and closer to it as we develop better methods for approaching that information. I have a much more scientific epistemology than seems to prevail in postmodernist theory. So I like some of it. But a lot of it falls flat when I read the broader work. So I'm kind of a synthesist in that sense when it comes to the mixture of those two traditions. But if somebody were to ask me which way do I lean more towards an analytic orientation than a continental orientation. I think it is good to aim for clarity and precision. I think we should respect scientific methodology and recognize that it is the most effective and successful epistemology that has ever been developed, and that it cannot just be placed side by side with other epistemologies. We cannot just relativize all epistemologies. The scientific epistemology has proven itself superior to other epistemologies. So yeah, I could say a lot on that, and I have before, but people always get angry, so I'm just going to move on. Oh, I guess another aspect of metamodernism is it is a return to sincerity. I think a lot of metamodernists, one of the things they don't like about postmodernism is how lacking sincerity it is. It seems like it's all about kind of like a satirical position. It doesn't say what it means. It's navel gazing. It spends all of this time trying to get you to do so much work to understand what it's saying. And I think metamodernism is an attempt to return to clarity and sincerity, where I'm just saying what I mean. I think that, that's the approach we should take. Instead of dancing around the topic, instead of, trying to make it harder, really just saying precisely what is going on and sincerely engaging with reality and a belief in our ability to change it, rather than engaging in cynicism and detachment. Hey Asabi gave $5. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. And they said, thoughts on social ecology, Bookchin more broadly. I love Bookchin. I'm a huge fan of social ecology. In fact, in my video essays, you'll find that I mention social ecology numerous times and Bookchin. Huge fan of Bookchin. In fact, top book right here, Murray Bookchin's Ecology of Freedom. Read a lot of Bookchin. The group I'm in, Cooperation Tulsa, is based around Bookchin and Rojava and the Zapatistas, and our reading groups are around Bookchin as well. So, yeah, I think that's my position. I love Bookchin. Huge fan. I consider him one of the most important theorists of the modern era. I've even said that he's kind of our modern Marx in a sense. NG Comrade, I am Bookchin's strongest soldier. I see. Well, glad to meet you. Simnot Sam says, Daniel, what is the best approach when it comes to media and free speech? You want the free discussion of media, but don't want a new Rush Limbaugh or Fox News to rise up and brainwash people again. Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely true. But it should be said that a lot of the reason why that a Rush Limbaugh or a Fox News can even be successful is precisely because hierarchical power prevails in society, right? They're benefiting from a hierarchical power structure. They're propped up by a variety of hierarchical power structures. The people are even open to or conducive to listening to it because they are brainwashed by hierarchical power structures. So I think that in a horizontal society where horizontal conceptions were more default, hegemonic, as you might call it, I don't think that a Fox News and a Rush Limbaugh would be very successful. It would be, like the way that anarchists are constantly fighting against the tide of a hierarchy within a hierarchical society. I think that in a horizontal society, hierarchical people would be fighting against the tide of horizontality. I think that horizontalism would be such a default perspective in a horizontal society that it would be way harder for hierarchical individuals to catch up from behind. And that's good. We should hope to suppress them in that sort of indirect sense. Insofar as free speech, obviously there's limits to free speech, trying to spread harmful fascist ideology is not something that we should ever, respect in any society. Knowledge and defense, hot take, but I think support for libertarian socialism, mainly anarchist and communalism, don't know of many others, would instantly take over if and when the auth left and ANCAPs die off. I definitely think that if there were not an authoritarian left, we would be so much further towards revolution at this point. I think that one of the biggest disasters for leftist revolutionary activity in history has been the authoritarian left. I think that they have held us back an enormous amount. In fact, we have essentially been set back a century by the authoritarian left because they took revolutions that actually had the capability to overthrow capitalism, and they turned them into revolutions which reestablished capitalism. And more than that, now they have associated revolutionary ideology and revolutionary radicalism and anti-capitalism with the very methods which re-established capitalism. I see authoritarian leftism as being a form of recuperation. Recuperation is when some power structure turns a radical idea into one that is no longer harmful to it, and in fact benefits its functioning, right? So we can see, for example, anti-racism was once like universally radical, right? But the power structure recuperated anti-racism through this sort of rainbow capitalism. So now we have rainbow capitalism. It recuperated these radical things like anti-racism and anti-homophobia, such that now there are forms of anti-homophobia and anti-racism which are actually conducive to the prevailing power structure. I see authoritarian leftism as that for revolutionary ideology. It is the recuperation of revolutionary ideology to capitalism. So it essentially takes revolutionaries and it funnels them into a pro-capitalist ideology, but they don't think they're pro-capitalist because it's taken all of the superficial features of socialism, the aesthetics and the claims, the criticisms of capitalism, but then it funnels all of their energies into the reproduction of capitalism. So I actually think that the authoritarian left is one of the most useful contingents on earth for maintaining capitalism. And so I would tend to agree with you. As on the part about ANCAPs, I don't think most ANCAPs are the kinds of people who were on our side to begin with. I think that as ANCAPs radicalize, they're more likely to become fascists. That's not to say all of them. In fact, I've talked with plenty of people who used to be ANCAPs and became mutualists and then anarcho-syndicalists and then anarcho-communists and so on. But I think the majority of them are essentially kind of what's the best way to put it? Petite fascists. They're miniature fascists. They want fascism on a small scale, decentralized fascism. You know what I'm saying? So I don't think that they actually. I don't think that they are a very important constituency in that sense. I don't think that anarcho-capitalism is doing much to undermine the movement. And I don't think that many people who would be anarchists otherwise become ANCAPs instead, except for in conditions where they just don't know any better and that's the only thing they're exposed to. But I think the authoritarian left is a much bigger threat to revolutionary activity than ANCAPs are. ANCAPs are just tools of the system as it currently is. They are outcomes of neoliberalism, whereas authoritarian leftists they dupe revolutionary-minded people into reestablishing capitalism, which I think is far more dangerous. Johnny Bravo says, even if workers own the means of production, if you don't get rid of the profit motive and profit maximization of profit, it's not socialism, it's capitalism with co-ops. Yeah, I mean, I'm like sympathetic to that viewpoint, but I mostly hear it from authoritarian leftists who don't even have any claim to doing that. The only people who have ever gotten rid of, profit motive, profit maximization, market structures are anarchists and libertarian socialists. That's literally the only people who have any claim to it. Authoritarian leftists only create state capitalism and usually just revert back into normal capitalism. Whereas anarchists and libertarian socialists are the ones that have actually had successful experiments with full decommodification, especially the CNTFAI and the Zapatistas, who have actually, in certain occasions, fully decommodified their agricultural product. So, I'm sympathetic to that, but I see it mostly used by people who are just trying to they just don't want there to be any worker cooperatives. And their alternative are things worse than worker cooperatives. Worker cooperatives get you closer to socialism than nationalization does. Nationalization maintains all of the primary modes of alienation that define capitalism. NG Comrades, as far as ANCAPs go, calls it militant neoliberalism. Agreed. Militant neoliberalism is a great name for anarcho-capitalists. Humdrum Anarchy says, hey, just wanted to say your video on Aaron Bushnell had a big impact on me and thank you for making it. I'm really glad to hear that. That video felt really important to make. I had been planning instead to make another liberation and action video there because that would just be what would take place, given that I, have been making those videos every Friday. But that seemed like the right thing to do was create that tribute to Aaron Bushnell. However, unfortunately, it has been demonetized and age restricted, and they even put an extra layer where you have to click a dialogue box and then click another agreement before the video will even play for you. It was previously about to go viral. The curve was like going straight up. It was like 10, 20 times more views than a regular video would get. And then 4 hours in, they did all of that. They demonetized it, they age restricted it, and it flattened off enormously. And unfortunately, now more people will not be able to see that video. But yeah, I also think that video was an important one. I'm glad that you were impacted by it. Spirit of the Tall Hills says, is there still room for Marxist-Leninist cooperation and revolution, at least to an extent short of the implementation of ML power structures? The IFB in Rojava is said to have both anarchist and ML members. Yeah, the way I look at it is this. When you're building the revolution, before you have reached before you've gotten to the point where horizontal power is hegemonic, it is default, there's no going back, horizontal power is how everything functions, then you need to keep authoritarian leftists out. They're just going to poison anything that takes place. They're going to try to co-opt it. They're going to try to take control, and they're going to try to claim credit for everything that was done as soon as they get involved. That's their whole deal. So you have to keep them out. You want a platform that explicitly excludes authoritarian leftists. However, once you have gotten to a position where you are autonomous and the horizontal power is the default, then yeah, obviously you're going to have authoritarian leftists in your society. You're going to have all kinds of people in your society. And if you don't have some form of pluralism after you've established that, then there's just no way around it, or there's no way that would work. There's no way that structure would function. So you will need at some point to establish pluralism. And I would say that comes when you are developing radical revolutionary organizations, be platformist and exclude authoritarian leftists and do not work with authoritarian leftists. However, once those organizations have become very powerful and they have essentially claimed autonomous regions or have overthrown some form of state structure in their region, then you can create pluralistic forms for everybody to function under. You know, like the Zapatistas or Rojava, or the CNTFAI or Ukraine. In all of these examples, you know, you see that they had pluralism after they got a huge amount of revolutionary activity. Well, the Zapatistas is a very unique one, but... Alistair Gray says, do you have a Discord server or another community where your viewers can talk with each other? Yes, I do. And if you would like access to the Discord server, you should go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark, A-N-A-R-K, which obviously, I guess you know that, you're here, right? But I will also put a link to it here in the chat. And if you become a patron for any amount, $2, $5, $7, $10, or $20, I think those are the tiers, then you will get access to the Discord server. You said 8 out of 10 plug. Oh, okay. Well, you know, couldn't be perfect, I guess. Rim G says, what is pluralism? Pluralism is the acceptance of a large variety of different kinds of viewpoints. Knowledge and Defense asks, why do you think anarchists tend to be a minority during revolutions? Are most people just too afraid of not being lorded over by rulers? Also, could ANCAPs co-opt us in the next revolution? As for why anarchists tend to be a minority during revolutions, I think that's largely a matter of praxis, because you can see that that has not always been the case. There have been occasions where anarchists actually had a very large constituency. Take, for example, the CNTFAI. And I think that in large part, anarchists are not majorities because they don't do the work a lot of the time to integrate into social movements that exist and to do the work of spreading propaganda and education and so on. And instead, unfortunately, will tend to kind of separate themselves off into, small like echo chambers and stuff. And this is part of the reason, again, why I think that this individualist approach is so ineffective. But so your second part is, you say, are most people just too afraid of not being lorded over by rulers? I don't think it's that they're too afraid of it. I think it's that most people are brainwashed by what I call hierarchical realism, which is the belief that the only kind of consistent system that can exist is a hierarchical one. And so when they are given a variety of different structures to choose from, which they think might be put into place, they are less likely to choose one which is horizontal because they believe that you have to have a hierarchical society. So with that in mind, you might get a lot of people who would otherwise be very revolutionary, essentially taking place in their own subjugation by approving of hierarchical power. The last is, could ANCAPs co-opt us in the next revolution? Extremely unlikely. ANCAPs basically don't have a praxis. They are not engaged in social movements. They are not in anarchist organizations for the most part. And wherein they are present, they are highly ineffectual and make very little actual, they have very little effect on what actually takes place. And I mean, I can't even imagine how quickly and brutally they would be shut down if they tried to steer revolutionary activity in a different direction towards capitalism. These are all explicitly anti-capitalist spaces, so I doubt they really have any possibility of doing so. As for whether they might try to claim that activity from the outside, maybe, but honestly, even then, probably not. I think that ANCAPs are wary to associate themselves with any real anarchist activity. They instead just like having online communities where they pump themselves up about their ideology and live in fantasy worlds that have no real application in real life. April asks, how do you hold on to hope? Sometimes it feels like change is impossible, even if it's really not. Well, I literally wrote a video essay on that topic called Hope, and I highly recommend it. I really spent a lot of time working on it. It was a labor of love. You know, there's a lot of work you do when you're writing like this, which is like, this is necessary. It has to be done. This is one where I wanted it to be beautiful. I wanted it to be effectual. It was a very important video in my mind. And I'm going to link it here in the chat. I guess the long story short is that hope is not about knowing that you're going to succeed. Hope is not about knowing the future. Hope is not optimism. Okay. Optimism is about saying you know good things are going to happen, or that you believe good things are going to happen, as opposed to pessimism, which is to say you know bad things are going to happen, or you believe bad things are going to happen. I advocate what I call a hopeful realism, and that is not claiming you know what's going to happen, simply understanding that if you want to bring into existence a future world that is what you want, that is that ideal world that you want to see come into existence, then there are a certain set of circumstances that have to take place in order for that to happen. And you, as a person, must become party to those changes. You are an active element in how society proceeds, and you must earnestly do what is necessary to bring about the world you wish to see. You don't need forget this assurance that things will or will not go bad. Nobody knows the future. We cannot know what will or will not happen in the future. All we can know is what we desire to take place and what must be done to bring it into existence. And at that point, you set your mind to the actions. Set your mind to doing what must be done, and stop looking for the assurance of what will or will not happen in the future, because the future is impossible to predict. All you can know is your actions in the now, and observe the outcomes of your actions and ask yourself whether they are leading materially towards the goal at hand, and do everything that is necessary to bring about the goal at hand. To me, that's what hope is. Hope is an eternal recognition that there is still time to act, and that there will always still be time to act, and that we must continually work towards the negation of our own oppression. And therefore, hope lies in action. Hope is not an abstract ideal. Hope is something you do. So, Tempest Lord Raihan says, hopeful realism. No one knows what will happen, but if you want a better world, you have a duty to fulfill your part in building it. Absolutely. Absolutely. Ingy Comrade, speaking of hope, ever read any anarcho-nihilist theory? If so, what did you think of it? I think the doomerism accusations of it is unfair, but they're too pessimistic for me. I've read Blessed is the Flame, and I skimmed Desert. And the video I just recommended, Hope, actually addresses anarcho-nihilism directly. So you can get much more in-depth critiques of anarcho-nihilism there. Confused Lefty says, what is the anarchist view on religion? Is religious anarchism a thing? Yeah, religious anarchism. There's a lot of religious anarchism. That being said, I mean, I get how people could be confused about that. There's historically anarchism, really all leftism, was associated with not only atheism but anti-theism. However, modern anarchism is really not, nor is most modern leftism. It instead, what you'll see is that there is a bunch of synthesis of these leftist perspectives with religious perspectives. So there's Christian anarchism and Buddhist anarchism and Hindu anarchism and a Muslim anarchism or Arab anarchism more broadly. There's a pagan anarchism. There's a bunch of different syntheses of anarchism with religious conceptions out there. So if you are a religious person, and, it's a completely out of the realm of possibility for you to question your religious beliefs, then just understand that there is anarchism that meets you where you're at, that was written by people with your religious beliefs, that found the agreement between anarchism and your religious beliefs. It's pretty much going to be out there. I mean, confused lefty, you say thoughts on liberation theology, and that's exactly what I'm saying. There's an example, liberation theology. Panos Roussis says, "Hey, Anark, speaking of the authoritarian left, in Greece, the Communist Party sometimes dominates leftist circles. These circles tend to be really conservative. Is this the case with authoritarian leftists elsewhere? I mean, it can be in certain places, and this is why I advocate platformism or especifismo. We can't be letting these people into our spaces. Authoritarian leftism is a co-opter's ideology. Their whole point is to enter into spaces and to gain control of those spaces. So when you let an authoritarian leftist into your space, they are going to try to take control of your space. They're going to try to turn it hierarchical, and then they are going to try to turn it into a propaganda arm for their ideology. So this is why you have to have a platform that excludes authoritarian leftists, that you absolutely cannot let them into your spaces, and you cannot cooperate with them. They are, their ideology, it's not about them as individuals. Their ideology is duplicitous and deceptive and controlling. So you just have to exclude them. That's how it works. You have to marginalize them. And hopefully if we marginalize them enough, they will become powerless. That's the ideal. We marginalize them off on the margins, and we integrate in the social movements, and we build power. We build horizontal power structures along with the masses, and we spread libertarian socialist ideology more broadly. And we hope that the authoritarian leftists languish in obscurity. Because like you say, they're going to take control, and they're going to make everything more conservative. Authoritarian leftism is a fundamentally more conservative set of ideologies. It will always tend you towards more conservatism, and what practice shows is that it's also going to make you rife with things like transphobia, homophobia, and broader conservative conceptions of the world. I mean, if you just look at the authoritarian leftist parties across the planet, they are rife with bigotry. And this is not to say they're like, I don't mean that they are just like exclusionary of those identities. I mean that they're also actively spreading anti those identities. They are places where fascist rhetoric often re-enters the conversation. You see a lot of authoritarian leftist groups in the modern day, which are aping somebody like Alexander Dugin, who is a known fascist. This is not like, oh, I'm calling him a fascist because I disagree with him. Like, no, Dugin is a fascist. And you have authoritarian leftists who are promoting ideology and positions which were popularized by Alexander Dugin and Russian fascists. So like, authoritarian leftism is a counter-revolutionary cult federation, essentially. It's a decentralized cult that seeks to establish centralization of the cult. So I could not explain to you any more strongly how much authoritarian leftists have to be like excluded from every revolutionary and radical space. Like here in town, we literally have an authoritarian leftist cult. Literally
they're authoritarian leftists, and it is actually a cult. We have people who've come out of it who went to cult therapy afterwards. That's how much it is a cult. Like, I don't mean this in a euphemistic sense. I mean, literally, they're cults. It's very dangerous. It is a counter-revolutionary ideology. So got another donation, this time from Disruptive Philosophy for $20. I appreciate it. They say, what do you think about the role of psychology in revolution? The current mental health industry is a capitalist structure that should not be trusted. Many leftists cling to the authoritarian power of mental health lies. Well, I have a nuanced perspective on this. Obviously, it's the case that the mental health industry is indeed, rife with a bunch of like subjective biases of the people who are practicing within that industry. It is one of the sciences that is extremely susceptible to the biases of hierarchical society and of just social conditioning in general. A lot of the time, people's personality types, which are just stigmatized in broader society, are then medicalized in mental health. That being said, it is not just completely superfluous. There are indeed actual mental health problems for which we do indeed need mental health professionals. We do need people who can do things like psychiatry and psychology, even if those fields are highly distorted and need lots of solutions, need lots of fixing, needs a lot of what I just mentioned rooted out. Those fields are still necessary. There are people with severe mental conditions that absolutely do need help, that absolutely do need medication, that absolutely do need extensive forms of therapy, and for which those mental health conditions are not neutral, they are negative for those people. And that can't be denied. And I think that's one of the issues that I often see in this debate. People keep taking too strong a sides, one or the other. It's something in the middle. Mental health absolutely has all of it, formalizes a lot of these stigmatized features and stigmatized personality types in society. Yet at the same time, there are indeed an array of very negative mental health conditions that it wouldn't matter what society you put that person in, it would be negative. For example, I have ADHD. ADHD has both positive and negative features to it. And it wouldn't matter what society I was in. Some of those negative features would just be negative, period. For example, absent-mindedness, the fact that I have motivation problems sometimes. I have bad executive dysfunction. A lot of people will say like, oh, executive dysfunction is only bad because you're in a capitalist society. That's not true. Executive dysfunction is bad because you cannot force yourself to do things that are necessary in your life. And that's just bad in every society. So executive dysfunction is negative for me and for pretty much everybody who has it. And it wouldn't matter what society you put those people in, but it's got positives as well. ADHD gives me hyperfocus. It allows me to, the sort of dopamine regulation cycle allows me to really dig in and conceptualize things very, 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 very deeply. And I'm grateful for that. But there's just so much that could be said about this subject. I hope that kind of serves as an overview of the way I look at this. It's like, obviously you're right. It's especially very perverted by capitalism. But mental health is still exists. And there are in fact, mental conditions which are unhealthy, which are not good for those people, who are not good for anybody, and are certainly not good for people that are surrounding them. Come Together Counseling says, executive dysfunction is not bad because of capitalism, but it is heavily caused by capitalism. Yeah, it's a lot worse. I'll say that. I'm certainly way more distressed. My executive dysfunction is way more harmful to me because of capitalism. There's no doubt about that. That's absolutely true. In the sort of society I would like to see, in an anarchist society, my executive dysfunction would not harm me as much. I would certainly be a lot better off under those conditions, but I would still it would still harm me. Executive dysfunction would still harm me. And then, there's a lot of people, for example, that have ADHD and they're always late for things, right? And they're forgetful. I'm very forgetful, but lots of ADHD people even more forgetful than me. There is no society. A friend of mine once said this because we were having this exact discussion, and she's also got ADHD. She said, there is no society where me forgetting my friend's mother's wake is going to be okay. And that's just going to be acceptable because, well, it's not capitalism anymore. So, it always is going to lead to some negative features that we should hope to be able to, if not fix, then ameliorate somehow, right? There is some condition, obviously, where everything that surrounds us determines whether relatively these are negative things, but some of these things are just universally negative things. So... because it's on topic, I'll continue. Even there's a lot of great questions I've been seeing here. Kavas Man says, what do you think about the medicalization of ADHD? Yeah, well, I kind of got into that a little bit. ADHD to me, I think should be better understood as neurodivergence rather than just a mental issue. But because there are very positive aspects of ADHD, but I do much prefer to be medicated as an ADHD person. I think that it's going to depend on the person, what medication is going to be good for you and whether medication is going to be good for you. You might be able to manage without it, but I absolutely need interventions personally to function correctly. And I think that would be true in absolutely any society. So Pikachu Man says, I'm curious, why don't you usually do videos about foreign policy and current events? Because that would be a different kind of channel. That's one of those things where if you get into foreign policy and current events, your whole channel could just be completely subsumed by that. You could literally release videos every day of the week talking about foreign policy and current events, and you would never run out of content. It's kind of like how in a newsroom, they never catch up. You never it used to be that they talked about having slow news days. There are no such thing as slow news days anymore. Okay. And in that sense, if I had a channel that worried about current events and foreign policy and all of that, I could spend every day releasing videos about that. What I'm looking to do is not talk about, this is actually the reason why I didn't produce Liberation in Action as a series for like the first 4 years of this channel. And it's because you could list off specifics all day long. If I wanted to be a history channel or I wanted to talk about examples, I could just go and go and go and go and go and go and go. What I want to do is instead on this channel, I want to develop theory and I want to develop wide spanning understandings, analytical frameworks for people so that what they can do is hold this box of tools in a sense, take this toolbox and apply it to any circumstance they see instead of being sort of, locked into thinking about example A, example B, example C. Those things are useful, but what I want to do is develop a conception and a methodology and spread a conception and a methodology that is going to help you, is going to be universal. That it's going to give you a toolbox that works in every set of circumstances. And especially the video essays I write, are aimed towards developing that toolbox for you. So that's what I want to spend my efforts on as a person. That's what I think my mind is well oriented towards. That's what I think that I am well suited to provide to the movement. And I could talk about the current events and foreign policy and things like that and history more. But I don't think that if I spent all my time on that, it would be more valuable to the movement than me spending my time on doing what I'm currently doing, developing theory and an understanding of praxis and trying to popularize that theory and praxis. Confused Lefty says, what do you think of Marx's critique of egalitarianism? Is it valid? Yeah, I think so. I think, insofar as, I think maybe you're referring to the analysis of Zoe Baker. Zoe Baker is kind of talking about how Marx was not an egalitarian. Yeah, it's valid. I think that if you ever develop any metric which you are trying to equalize across, you're going to find that you de-equalize another metric. That being said, I think that the only metric that I can find for which you should try to equalize across is equality of structural power. More broadly, you might say access to structural power. And I know that's very abstract. We can't really attach a number to that, but I do think that that is broadly what all leftist movements are trying to do, because once you've equalized structural power, then you've made it to where people do not have lopsided control over one another and are then able to fulfill their own needs and desires in society. So yeah, but I think Zoe Baker's analysis was very good. I think that insofar as that was a faithful understanding of Marx, which I assume it is, Zoe Baker's a very good academic, then I think Marx is correct. And in fact, you can see that Kropotkin has actually made very similar points. Isaac says, what would happen if an authoritarian left country dominated society were to take over? What would happen if not a communist society? Capitalism. I mean, I really don't think anything other than maybe capitalism, like really like crunchy social democracy, maybe. But we've already seen like what happens. They've given us demonstration. We don't really have to, theorize. Like you can look at the USSR, you can look at China. They're essentially just social democracies, and that's overselling it a little bit. China doesn't even have universal health care. China has private health care. So honestly, you're even better off in like Norway in some occasions, or, Denmark, so definitely not communism. They've demonstrated no efforts to move towards communism. Spirit of the Tall Hill says, do you think most mentally ill people are just struggling to fit into the pressure of hierarchical capitalist society than an actual medical condition? Of course, it is sometimes, I'd say, but not always. Yeah, I would take that on a case-by-case basis. I think that there's certainly the one that I think that's probably most correct for is autism. Okay, to the degree where I wouldn't even call autism mental illness. Once again, we're in another situation. I call it neurodivergence, right? I think it leads to certain difficulties for people, but I think that some of the most negative parts of autism could be completely eliminated in a different kind of society. But I think that a lot of mental illness is not only comes from the pressure to fit into a hierarchical capitalist society, but is caused by hierarchical capitalist society because it traumatizes people. And that trauma then creates a bunch of mental illnesses, and they kind of become like a social contagion in that sense. Sorry to use maybe a little bit of a loaded term there, but they spread by way of widespread abuse by hierarchical society. John Doe says, is it worth debunking neoliberal lies about ML countries? I know they weren't utopias, but liberals like to make up outlandish claims like that North Koreans believe in unicorns. I mean, when I'm given the opportunity, I will. I never let a lie about one of those countries stand in a conversation, no matter how much I might agree with them that those countries are not ideal. If I'm talking with a liberal or a conservative about one of those authoritarian left countries like the USSR, Cuba, or China, or whatever, I don't let them lie in the process. I don't think that's useful or necessary, and I think we should definitely push back against that when we see it happen. But in the same measure, we should probably try to produce a more valid critique. What I do is I'm often like, yeah, I agree with you that those places are not ideal and they had a bunch of negatives, but me and you probably disagree on what those things were. Me and you probably disagree on what went wrong and what was bad about those places, right? And then that opens us up to a conversation, to talking about maybe the more valid critiques, the ones that are not just made up bullshit from the West that literally they just lied about the USSR and China and stuff. I think it's a good idea to try to debunk those when they come across, but I would not devote your efforts to going around debunking them. I debunk them on a case-by-case basis when they arise, when you're having a discussion with someone. And in the process, be very clear that you're like, this doesn't mean that I support them. I just think that, you should know that that's not true. This is true instead, right? I think it's good to clarify the truth is always preferable for us because the truth is on our side. So. NG Comrade says, as a foreign policy nerd, it takes an insane amount of research and being very careful with your sources to even know what you're talking about. Never mind having good independent analysis of geopolitics. Yeah, that's another aspect. Okay, I got a lot of respect for those things, and I don't want to go around saying things that are wrong. Those things are important. I don't want to say wrong things about current events and foreign policy and so on. I'll make a comment when I'm confident, but I don't want to spend all my time doing all of that analysis in order to make content about that. KX says, I know obviously overall we believe anarchists have things the best, but do you think there's anything specific you find anarchists aren't as good on that we should learn from that others do better? Yes. One of those is self-discipline. I think that anarchists need to respect that building a revolutionary transforming society is going to require that we all cultivate self-discipline. And I don't mean discipline imposed from the outside. I mean a discipline that we begin to cultivate ourselves. Okay. And understand that discipline's not negative. Discipline is positive. Discipline is your ability to resist derailing temptations. It's the ability to have control over yourself, your psyche, your actions, etc. And it requires discipline because discipline is about delaying gratification. And what you'll find is if you do that, you'll actually feel more satisfied on a daily basis. You'll get more done. And in that process, you'll probably be able to transform society much more. You'll probably be much more able to transform society. So I think that we need to cultivate more self-discipline. Eric Gray with a donation for $5. I appreciate you, Eric. He says, recommended reading, Striving to Become an Anarchist Educator by Anarchist Pedagogies Collective. And it can be found online in the Anarchist Library. Cool. Yeah. I will keep that in mind. I plan probably eventually to do a video on anarchism and education. So many people ask about it. I am going to use the restroom. I'll be right back. So there was a one that kept getting mentioned. Let me find it. Sorry, y'all are ridiculous. I'm just reading these comments here. Knowledge and Defense has asked us a few times, why do you think the EZLN couldn't abolish money internally, just plan everything directly, and only keep it for external trading with outsiders? Isn't this kind of what the C&T FAI tried to do? So, I think there's a variety of circumstances that lead to that. One is that insofar as you want to interact with the outside world, you got to have money. Okay. So like you have to have money to interact with the outside world. So insofar as you're just trying to provide things internally for your own people, it's a lot easier to just do direct planning and distribution. Because what does it matter? You know, it just goes from the fields to people's mouths. You know, you didn't need money to begin with. But if you are trying to distribute it in a way that is either, you know, mixed with the outside world or directly to the outside world, well, you're going to have to commodify things. There's no way out of it. And that understanding of outside commodification becomes an understanding of inside commodification. And that is not really something you can avoid in that sense. So that's what I think. I think it's even more complex than that, but that's kind of the short-ish answer. Testing? Oh, somebody said they can't hear audio. No audio? Is that true? It shows that I'm getting audio. Can y'all not hear any audio right now? Testing, testing. Oh, it's a prank, huh? Oh, okay. They're just fucking with me. Well, it was successful. There you go. You did it. You did it. I'm proud of you. The prank worked. I mean, that was it, you know. We did it, y'all. We pranked Anark. Wow. Wow. Well, there's no going back now. So I'm not sure how long I'm going to stream. We got him, boys. Is Dong going to become a joke for the channel? Is that what's happening now? Oh, nice. A friend of mine says he's watching the live stream. I don't know if he still is, but what's up, Will? I'm talking straight to you, buddy. You get a special shout out because you've been my friend for so long. So here it is. Hi, Will. I'm pointing directly at you. How does that make you feel? Send me a DM if that one went through, if you heard that. He sent that like 2 hours ago. Nice. There you are, Will Hamilton. That's the man right there. How will Dong be directly distributed in communism? From the Dong havers to the Dong needers. Okay. Dong shall be distributed freely by the Dong havers. Well, I suppose that'll be up to the Dong havers. Okay. Softball question, best Beatles album, Abbey Road. Boom. Next in line, Sgt. Pepper's. Next in line, Rubber Soul. From each according to his dong, to each according to his need. Yeah, we call that anarcho-dongism. John Doe asked, what role will my dog play in the revolution? I don't know. All we know is about what role dongs will play in the revolution. Got another donation from Matt Foos for $5. He says, just about your thoughts on maroon communities related to anarchism. I know the video is forthcoming, but just briefly. Yeah, that's going to require some research, because some people, they included examples which really sounded awesome, but when I researched them, they had hierarchical power structures in them. Not necessarily the maroon communities, but some of the like indigenous rebellions that people noted. I went and researched them, and they had really strict hierarchies in them. And so I'm going to have to like really kind of look at each of these closely. And because another one that I researched had a hierarchy, but the chief didn't really have any formal power. He was kind of just a diplomatic figurehead. So these each require me to do a significant amount of research. As far as maroon communities, my first inclination about the maroon communities to read about them or research them is reading Modibo Kadali's book. What is it called? Pan-African Social Ecology, I think is what it's called. Pan-African Social Ecology, if I recall correctly. Sam gave $5 just to say, long live Dong. That's right. Y'all heard it here. Long live Dong. Thoughts on Dong versus Mao Zedong? Which is better? Dong, 100%. I think we all know that. Confused Lefty, so much content for the next Anark Out of Context video in today's stream. That's so true. Oh, it's Kalen Conrad. What's up, Kalen? Good to see you here. It's all dong jokes now. The stream has just become dong jokes at this point. I need to be more drunk, I think. By the way, Kalen, love your videos. Been watching your channel since you were pretty small, actually. And love to see how far you've come. Although I say that, but you had crazy quality like out the gate. Do you have some kind of background in video editing or something? Because you're like way too good at it. You just started like crazy good at it. Oh, the dong is what summoned you. Well, that adds up. That adds up. That makes sense. That's all the chat is now. I'm down with it. How would dong be produced in an anarchist society? I mean, I guess you have both the organic and the synthetic methods, right? Organic method is you just make babies. But then the synthetic method is you make dongs, typically, I think, usually out of plastic, right? Or some other form of synthetic material. But those are two really good methods. Kalen says, my background is that I made videos for my friends and that will never see the light of day. You're self-taught. Damn, you're really good at it. Got another donation from Matt Foos. Matt is getting at it this time. Matt says, what, in your opinion, generally prevents SOCDEM, socialists, and communists from becoming anarchists? It's what I mentioned earlier, what I call hierarchical realism. And this is kind of related to what is called capitalist realism. Mark Fisher wrote a book called Capitalist Realism. And capitalist realism is the belief that the only system which can exist is capitalism, essentially, that we are at the end of history. There is nothing beyond capitalism. And I use this phrase hierarchical realism to refer to a similar concept, but for hierarchy. The belief that hierarchy is the only way to organize society, that there is no future wherein we can have a non-hierarchical society, that hierarchy is optimal, it is the best, there's no moving past it. And I think hierarchical realism is a result of the essentially the social abusive tendencies of a hierarchical society. In a way that, sorry if this is triggering at all, talking about abuse just for interpersonal abuse, like in relationships here for a moment. But in an abusive relationship, what takes place is the abuser imprints their abusive ideology onto the victim. They abuse the victim, they break them down over and over and over, and their goal is to make the victim believe about themselves what the abuser believes about the victim, such that the victim becomes more malleable. They do what the abuser wants. They degrade the victim. They break down their psyche little by little until the victim is now able to be controlled. The victim no longer fights back. The victim now believes about themselves what the abuser believes about them. I think that just takes place at a social scale under hierarchical power structures. Hierarchical power structures, they essentially carry out these same features of abuse, but at the social scale. And so we are all essentially institutionalized by hierarchy. And so we've taken into our minds this belief that hierarchy is the only way that society can exist, that the only structure by which politics can be managed. And in that process, we begin to think about ourselves, what our abuser thinks about us, which is that we are servile, lowly, degraded, and that we must have some powerful leader who is better than us and who knows better than us to tell us what to do. And therefore, we seek out hierarchies everywhere we go, even, unfortunately, in our desire to liberate ourselves from those very same hierarchies. Hopefully, that was a good answer. I got a $5 donation from Sam, and this is all he wants me to say. Drunken Dong, Anarchist Master, Anark. That's it. You just paid me $5 to say that, Sam. I just want you to, I want you to understand that you just paid me $5 to say Drunken Dong, Anarchist Master, Anark. There you go. I said it twice. Andrew P. says, Dong leads to a legitimate question. How will sex toy purchases be kept private in a communist society? What if people don't want others to know what they're buying? It is so interesting you bring that up because the theorist Michael Albert, who is one of the main contributors to what's called Paracon or participatory economics, actually says that the most common objection that he gets to his system of planning is, what will you do about the fact that there are a bunch of like private items people don't want exposed to others, Like, I think he calls it like the frilly panty problem or something like that. But I think the answer is that not literally everything has to be completely public. Everybody's desires and needs don't have to be completely public. Just having a place where you're essentially able to request what you need, but then it can just be sent straight to all of the pertinent entities, which can then furnish that thing to you. It's not necessary that is all completely public knowledge. Not all of that needs to be public knowledge, right? So it might just be some things which are opaque and some things which are legible about the planning process. Because remember, we're in the modern era, this ain't the late 1800s. All of our planning doesn't have to be done by dudes sitting around in, dusty rooms and with desks and piles of paper, We've got computers, we've got algorithms, we've got all kinds of adaptive artificial intelligence and stuff that could probably help us, determine this distribution. Those don't need to publish all of that in public every single time, so... I know it was probably a joke question, but hilariously, it is kind of, has kind of come up before. Andrew P., you say, that's hilarious because when I read Paracon, my first major question was about sex toys. Wow. Okay. Well, yeah, Michael Albert says that he's got that question numerous times. That's pretty funny. Drexel Clayton, I saw you've asked this before. What will your next Liberation in Action video be about? I'm thinking it's going to be Fejuve, or I think I'm saying this correctly for the first time, Sike Sola, one or the other. It'd probably be either a Fejuve or Sike Sola. I've done a little bit of research, enough to begin writing bullet points for those. That's what I plan on, at least. Eric Gray, another $5 donation. I appreciate you, Eric. Thank you. He says, I hope my very brief Black history reading list that I posted in the Discord server was helpful for those who want to read more about Black history. Yeah, it included a bunch of books that I included on the Black Anarchist reading list that I produced on the channel a little while back, but I'd say that only covers about 50% of it. You included a bunch that I actually had not even seen. Feel free to paste that into the chat if you like. I think it's a very good resource for people. Knowledge and Defense, you said, as an anti-apartheid Israeli, I believe I can positively influence our racist culture if I manage to convince people that becoming less hierarchical could solve our economic problems. Any tips? I would say one of the best things you could probably do is seek out Jewish anarchists. And I don't only mean in the current day, there's lots of Jewish anarchists, but I mean historically Jewish anarchists who have written theory as well. Because you may not know this, but Jewish anarchism is a very prevalent tendency. Very, very, very prevalent. There have been lots of Jewish anarchists. And so probably tracking down some texts about Jewish anarchism, hopefully something more introductory, would probably be very helpful. I should also note, Zoe Baker did a whole video about the history of Jewish anarchism, and you should go watch it. That might be a really good place to start. Yeah, if anybody doesn't watch or subscribe to Zoe Baker, you have to. I'm sorry. If you watch my channel, you have to subscribe to Zoe Baker. There's not an option. You have to. And I know that might sound unfortunate, but there's just no choice. You're contractually obligated. Little did you know when you click the subscribe button on my channel, you agreed that you would follow Zoe Baker. Inhuman Forum says, have you read much about Turkish anarchism? I've not. In fact, if you could give me something to get me started, that'd be great. Andrew P. says, do you believe that replacing the Israeli government with a Rojava-like system would help solve the major problems in that area? Yeah, I think that democratic confederalism is probably the best solution for Israel. But it really does not seem likely, I'm sad to say. It would be great, and it may lead to the end of ethno-fascism, or rather ethno-nationalist fascism. Sorry, I don't know why I even say the same thing twice, but in Israel, but I think it is very unlikely. That being said, it is, in my opinion, probably the best solution to apartheid in Israel, democratic confederalism. Eric Gray, funny enough, I found out about you through Zoe Baker. Well, that's cool. That's cool. What was the context of that? I wonder. Knowledge and defense. Isn't it ironic that the fathers of anarchism, Proudhon and Bakunin, were racists, considering racism is hierarchical? Yeah, it's pretty fucked up. It's pretty fucked up. It's really disappointing reading some of the things they said. Proudhon as well was a misogynist to boot. Not just a racist and an anti-Semite, but a misogynist. Bakunin was an anti-Semite. However, some of the worst things he said were before he became an anarchist. He still said some really stupid things after he became an anarchist, but not as bad as a lot of the quote mining that takes place. Bakunin, when he was younger, was a Slavic nationalist and said some really, really bad things. And it's not to diminish what Bakunin said later in life. He still said some really bad things, but not as bad as some of the earlier stuff he said. Knowledge and defense. Weird. After reading Rojava's constitution, it only defends private property under ownership by use. So doesn't this mean they only have personal and cooperative property? That was my understanding as well from the constitution in 2016. However, I get really mixed messages from researching this. I really can't put my foot down on what's going on with the economy of Rojava. I would love if I could speak with somebody who was an expert on Rojava and could talk to me about the sort of nitty-gritty details of their economy, because none of the sources I'm reading seem to be giving me the specifics that I'm hoping for. Eric Gray, I saw your comment on the Ashanti Alston video that Zoe Baker had posted. I love that talk. I love that talk. That is one of the best lectures I've ever watched. I'm going to link that in chat. It's so good. I love that talk. It is a perfect sort of middle ground. It's a beautiful synthesis of black anarchism and the Zapatistas. And that's just incredible. What more could you ask for? It's like candy for somebody like me, but I'm weird. I linked it in the chat straight to the video. It is a lecture by Ashanti Alston talking about when he visited the Zapatistas. And for context, the Ashanti Alston was a Black Panther in the time of the height of the Black Panthers. Okay. And he is now a black anarchist. Ashanti Alston is a very notable black anarchist. And a little bit later in life, after the end of the Black Panthers, he went and visited the Zapatistas in Chiapas, Mexico. And he talks about this profound experience in the lecture that I linked. Oh, okay. So now I know the name is said platformist. I think you've told me that before, but I'll mention again. What are your thoughts on Ayn Rand? Ayn Rand is one of the worst human beings I've ever read about. Ayn Rand is a selfish, a vicious, greedy person who really only served to spread a selfish, greedy, vicious ideology across the planet. Her books are terrible. Her characters are flat and unbelievable. They have incoherent politics. Also, I'm pretty sure while she was alive, she idolized a known serial killer and abuser. I don't remember the guy's name, but I read about this once recently. She was a terrible human being, and she has nothing to do with anarchism as far as I'm concerned. She is a shill for capitalism. Loda Bernacle says, what would you recommend for anarchists in MAGA strongholds? Probably Christian anarchism. Probably Christian anarchism. Find some Christian anarchism. Thoughts on the DSA? Worth getting involved in as an anarchist? Probably not, unless it's literally your only option. If all you've got in your town is DSA, sure. join DSA, try to find other anarchists and libertarian socialists, and probably join the Libertarian Socialist Caucus insofar as they still exist. I don't know to what degree they still exist. Panos Roussis says, in a previous live stream, if I remember correctly, you said that you don't consider squats and occupation as really revolutionary. Could you elaborate on that? Yeah, well, most squats and occupations I see are, number one, short-term and small scale. And I think that, short-term, to me, I don't think that really has a whole lot of use. I mean, other than providing temporary housing, but even then, it's so temporary, it may almost be counterproductive. Insofar as we're talking long-term, I think that they are often not as militant as they're going to need. And I mean militant in the military sense, okay? Because if you are squatting or occupying an area, the police are going to try to oust you. And you need to expect that they're going to escalate to higher and higher military effort in the process. If you are not prepared to defend that with military effort, then you are just giving people a temporary place to sleep, and then you are going to put them back on the street after you fail to protect the place that you've claimed. I consider that highly irresponsible. Now, if you are willing to defend it with armed force, and you are willing to do what is necessary to keep that place so that people can continue to have a place to stay, then I consider that viable, and I do think perhaps that has something to do with the revolutionary activity. Moreover, I might say, when the time comes when things are getting spicy, when we're escalating into more militant conflict with the state, yeah, I mean, damn, we just want to be squatting. We want to be occupying everywhere. We're already in the process of undergoing armed conflict. So what does it matter? We're already defending ourselves all the time. In that case, then squatting and occupying and all of that would be a form of just taking territory. So then I would say, yes, it has a revolutionary potential. But insofar as we're just like 10 people who want to go squat in an abandoned house or something, that's not revolutionary. That is fine. I support that. I would support helping those people not be ousted, but that doesn't add up to revolution. Sam gave me $5 to say Ayn Rand dated Alan Greenspan. Yeah, that is a dire insult, isn't it? I mean, damn. Not only Alan Greenspan is a terrible person, but Alan Greenspan. Wow. Just, I mean, to each their own, but just look at the man. Definitely not a sex symbol. So In Human Form donated $5. I appreciate you. They said, was Socrates a proto-anarchist? Also, thanks for your hard work as always. Let me know if you're still up for an interview sometimes. I absolutely am. If anybody requests an interview and I say yes, and then it doesn't happen, it's not that I've changed my mind. It's executive dysfunction. So, yeah, it's nothing personal. I just screw things up in that sense. I forget it. Sometimes it's just hard for me to even send a DM response. Yeah, if I don't send responses to you in DMs or you message me somewhere, and this is more broadly true, it's 99% of the time, it's executive dysfunction. It's just sometimes impossibly hard to get myself to do things that require 1 minute of effort. Couldn't tell you why that's the case. Brain is broken. But insofar as your previous, was Socrates a proto-anarchist? I'm sorry to tell you, I mean, you donated money for me to answer. I don't know enough about Socrates to answer that question. Straight up, I don't have the knowledge. I've learned about Socrates in a classroom. I've learned a little more from Bookchin, but that is, it's hard for me to discern whether that's the case from what I've learned. I think the truth is that insofar as it comes to Socrates' politics, I know more about Plato's politics because of Republic, right? But obviously, I don't need to tell you the Republic is not anarchist. It's not proto-anarchist. It has nothing to do with anarchism. It's very hierarchical. And insofar as that Plato is considered to be a inheritor of Socrates, then I would assume the answer is no. But you're asking, so I assume there must be some angle for which the answer is yes. And clearly Bookchin likes Socrates. He's all about Socrates, to be honest. Talks about him a lot. So I plead ignorance. Knowledge and Defense says, in regards to your video about voting, not to defend Biden, but isn't letting Trump win kind of accelerationist? Should we celebrate small SOCDEM victories or hate them for pacifying the workers? I wouldn't even consider Biden to be a SOCDEM victory. Here's the thing. I realized after that video that I feel like I should give my personal experience. Here's the thing. So I became politically conscious during the era of George W. Bush. George W. Bush was awful. He was terrible, really terrible president. He got us into the Middle East. He, created the war on terror. He destabilized the Middle East in a way that we're still feeling the repercussions for to this day. And, I really saw him as a demonic entity because I was kind of liberal at that point. I was young. And, in my mind, the most important thing I could imagine was getting Obama elected. I thought to myself, the worst Obama could do would still be better than George W. Bush. And I was even more than that excited about the presidency of Barack Obama. I actually really thought he was going to be a SOCDEM. I really thought he was going to be FDR 2.0. Okay. Then Obama actually became president. And Obama did not pull us out of the Middle East. Obama escalated the warrantless wiretapping program. In fact, he put in place something called PRISM. PRISM was a more beefed up version of the warrantless wiretapping that George W. Bush had been doing. He did not fight back against the Patriot Act. He signed in Patriot Act 2.0. In fact, he signed in a variety of draconian measures that ended up being worse in many ways than anything George W. Bush did. He did not put in place any social democratic measures. He put in place for our healthcare replacement, he put in place a plan literally created by the Heritage Foundation. And I know you're hearing that and you're saying, okay, well, that stuff all really sucks. But what I want to emphasize to you is that things are going to get worse every single presidency, no matter who enters the presidency. And it's so hard to get people to land back down on the ground, to come back down to reality, because they keep talking about the lesser of two evils. But every single person who gets elected, who gets into power, escalates the level of the machine from the previous person. Okay, look, here's an example. You're like, oh man, surely Biden is better than Trump. Okay, sure. I mean, abstractly, yes. But practically, Joe Biden has just continued the escalation of the border crisis. Okay, everybody was out in the streets having a meltdown about children in cages and abolish ICE. Okay, when Trump was in the presidency, but now that Biden's president, everybody likes to pretend like it's not a problem. Biden didn't do anything to fix that problem. In fact, all of that continues to escalate and now get worse under Biden. Okay, so you're like, oh yeah, well, Trump keeps filing up all this xenophobic rhetoric and all of that. Trump is so anti-immigrant. He's so anti-Israeli. Oh, the genocide. Okay, but Biden is all of those things. Biden is increasing border security. He's continuing to build the wall. There was this token maneuver where they wanted to remove some barbed wire. Nothing happened. They put in more barbed wire. Biden has been overseeing the escalation of the destruction of Palestine. He is helping Israel genocide the Palestinians. And it's like, I'm not saying that one or another of them is not better or worse in some abstract sense as to what they say they're going to do. Okay? But I'm saying in a practical sense, the difference between them is so negligible as to be almost non-existent in the amount of time that you all spend wringing your hands over the difference between them and the difference between them when they get into power. I'm just trying to help you understand that is negligible. It is a negligible difference. The reason why each of them is worse than the last is because it has nothing to do with them. It has nothing to do with them. The drivers of the machine have almost no power. They are largely just figureheads. The system has a driving impetus. It has a momentum that will not be stopped by a Joe Biden or anybody else you want to put into a position of power. The machine will continue forward, grinding up the lives of innocent people, regardless of which one of them ends up in power. And it's going to get worse with every single one of them, regardless of which one of them is elected. And the sooner people understand that and accept it, really let it sink in, the faster they will begin not wasting their time with the question of that anymore. Okay? It's a distraction. Would there maybe be marginal differences? Yeah. I don't want Trump to get elected. If you were to ask me, Daniel, which would you prefer to get elected? Biden or Trump? Biden. Straight up. Biden. Mostly just because I think Biden's rhetoric is less harmful. But at the end of the day, y'all waste so much time and effort and thought and arguing with other people over the topic of which one of them is going to win, when ultimately things are going to get worse at roughly the same pace regardless. Okay? If this was all really, really emphasized to me by Barack Obama. Barack Obama should by all means have been 10 times better than George W. Bush, and he had a mandate to do exactly what the people wanted. Okay? He was elected on basically a social democratic platform. He was going to regulate the banks. He was going to pull us out of the wars in the Middle East. He was going to eliminate the Guantanamo Bay. He was going to put in place universal health care. I don't think a lot of you know that that's what he was elected on. And what he did was worse than what George W. Bush did. So I guess the topic frustrates me because here I am now, more than a decade on in this process. And it is so hard for me to impress this fact on people because this distraction of the lesser of two evils and siding between the lesser of two evils is so profound. It just continually comes back to the fore. People continually want to talk about it, continually think it's so important. And I don't know how to emphasize to you how unimportant it really is. What is actually important, you want to know what is actually crucially important? It is for there to be a movement built from the bottom up that is able to actually pressure either one of them. That's what makes all the difference on what any of them are going to do. If there is not a movement that has any teeth beneath these presidents, they're going to do exactly what the system tells them to do. Okay? Every single one of them is going to do exactly what the system tells them to do. And the system wants blood. And they're just going to satiate the system. That is it. You have to accept that. You have to accept that if you really want to see things change, stop talking about electoral politics and start doing something to build a movement that can threaten these people that are in a position of power. Because if you don't, they don't care what you think. They don't care what platform that you elected them on. They don't care what you think about the lesser of two evils. it's all irrelevant. And it's so frustrating to me as a radical, because when I read about the time, the late 1800s and the early 1900s, what I'm saying was the dominant opinion of revolutionary leftists. Somehow in the modern era, everybody is duped by this distraction. They think it's so important. And I'm just endlessly frustrated by it. Endlessly frustrated. Because it didn't work back then, and they were in way better conditions, y'all. They already did parliamentarism way better than we're doing it. We're over here talking about the lesser of two evils with Joe Biden. They had literal social democrats and revolutionary socialists in positions of government, and it still led to everything I just described. It still led to the cycle of more and more blood, of more and more brutality, with parliaments that were full of socialists. I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm going in circles, but I'm endlessly tired. It's such a tedious conversation to me, because until you have banked on things getting better when one of these lesser two evils gets into power, and you've seen that it absolutely just doesn't, and you've seen it happen numerous times, you're not going to be broken of this conception. It's not fun. It's actually thoroughly disenchanting. It's actually thoroughly disturbing, but y'all are going to have to go through it. You're going to have to witness it firsthand before you understand what I'm saying. I'm sure right now you're like, Daniel, this is irresponsible, blah, 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 blah. I don't care, because I've experienced this firsthand. I've seen it all happen, and you're going to see it happen too. And I hope you come around to what I'm saying right now, because it's crucially important that everybody understands what I'm saying and comes around to the understanding that I'm trying to express right now. Anyway, I'm breathless from this rant, so I'm done. Tempest Lord Ryan says, I already went through it with Biden. Yeah, I'm glad that you went through it, because this is an important process. This disenchanting process is necessary for us to do anything that can actually change society. Rayon says, do you think most politicians and capitalists fully understand the role they play in oppressing the people and fighting democracy, or is it more of a mixture of inherent biases and willful ignorance? It's all of the above. It's all of the above. I think that some of them enter with just some inherent biases and willful ignorance, but that over time it becomes knowledge of the role they play in oppressing the people. And some of them enter with the knowledge of the role they play. Like Trump knows what his role is. Someone clip that rant. Maybe that'll turn into a Monday clip. We'll find out. Knowledge and defense. If you don't want to ensure the victory of the lesser evil in a scenario where one evil must win by the end of the year, then what is accelerationism? That's not accelerationism. The system is already accelerating. That's the point I'm getting across. It doesn't matter which one gets into power. The system is accelerating. That's the point. Right? It's like, you know, you're talking about like, you know, you're outside the wake of a black hole, and you're talking about how, man, what we really need to do is just pull a little bit of that matter away from the black hole. And it's like, yeah, I mean, if you pulled some matter away from the black hole, then obviously, yes, the black hole would accumulate matter slower. Yeah, but you're not going to stop the black hole by pulling a little bit of matter away from it. The black hole has its own driving impetus that is way bigger than anything you can do by taking matter away from it. It's a black hole. It has an inherent driving force that is taking place with or without your small, little, tiny tweak of the knobs. Okay? And the same thing is true with this system. This system has a driving momentum much greater than any individual within the system can change when you elect them. Rion gave me $2 for the rant. He says, I needed that rant. Thanks for the catharsis. Damn. Okay. Nice. I get $2 for ranting. Truly, I am in the correct career field right now. I get paid for ranting. Incredible. Tootie says, how do you feel about the dictatorship of the proletariat? I guess it really depends on what you mean. Marx's conception of the dictatorship of the proletariat is vastly different from what authoritarian leftists call the dictatorship of the proletariat. Marx's conception of the dictatorship of the proletariat was bottom up. And in fact, we know this for sure. This is not just like a matter of interpretation. We know it for certain, given that we can read Marx's Conspectus on Statism and Anarchy, which is Marx analyzing Bakunin's book, Statism and Anarchy. And in that, Marx is responding to Bakunin's critiques. Bakunin is critiquing this concept of the dictatorship of the proletariat because he's essentially conceiving of it as being as hierarchical and representative. Okay. And Marx in the Conspectus is clarifying that no, in fact, it would not be a dictatorship of the proletariat if it were hierarchical and representative. And he contends time and time again in his responses to Bakunin that no, the dictatorship of the proletariat must be of the proletariat by the proletariat as a mass from the bottom up, or it would not be the dictatorship of the proletariat. So I'll link that because it's just demolishes the authoritarian conception. It really clarifies that Marx was not really an authoritarian. In this case, how is Marx not anarchist? He's only not anarchist because he doesn't like broadly take into account the anarchist analysis. He doesn't really have a more robust understanding of how domination takes place in society, and he focuses a little bit too narrowly on economics. That being said, Marx, it was so close to anarchism that at the time of Marx, most anarchists held to Marx's analysis. In fact, Bakunin said he was a student of Marx. Carlo Cafiero created the only summary of Marx's Capital that Marx ever actually approved. You can read a variety of anarchists taking essentially Marx's positions on economics and their critique of capitalism. However, part of the issue was that Marx was, number one, early in life, Marx was much more of a statist and a parliamentarian. He was essentially a social democrat. He advocated creating a parliamentary party for the socialists in power. As his life went on, he became less and less so. However, the First International took place before Marx had fully begun to transform his conception. And unfortunately, the First International led to a split between the Marxists and the anarchists, which really never got repaired. Nonetheless, after the Paris Commune, Marx and Engels began to become less statist over time, less authoritarian, more believing that there was actually the possibility of a bottom-up revolutionary activity. And you can see this in a variety of things. You can see this in Engels' letter to Babel. You can see this in Marx's Conspectus, which I just linked. They begin to distance themselves from this more authoritarian or statist conception. So that being said, that's why a lot of anarchists actually get a lot from Marx. There's a lot of anarchists which are maybe not like fully in support of Marx, but are very inspired by Marx. One of them, for example, is someone we keep bringing up, Zoe Baker. Zoe Baker is an anarchist who's very inspired by Marx. Myself, I was essentially, my basic education, what I learned about leftist politics on, was mostly Marxism. Mostly Marxism. I learned about alienation theory. I learned about immiseration theory. I learned about the concept of surplus value, surplus accumulation under capitalism, labor exploitation, all this stuff. I learned about this really early on in my journey. Marx was like my training wheels, you might say. However, anarchism is a more robust analysis. It includes everything. It's not only about economics and surplus value, it's about every form of domination and rulership you could conceive of. It analyzes how power works. And I think the Marxists really lack a power analysis. That's really what it boils down to. They don't have a good understanding of how power structures work. So Marx really falls short. Marx gets maybe like 60% of the picture, and anarchists fill in the remaining 30%. So hopefully that answers your question. I got a $10 donation that all it says is anarcho-dongism with anarch characteristics. There it is. There it is. I mean, I've done my responsibility in reading that out. Sheriff Blatt says, did Marx or Engels ever officially try to repair the rift with anarchists before they died? No. Certainly not. To be fair, nobody tried to repair any of those rifts. They were pretty much permanent after the First International. There really wasn't any going back on that. Confused Lefty says, in one of your videos, you said something along the lines of revolution will happen constantly in an anarchist society. What did you mean by that? What I meant was that anarchist society is not, it's not strict. It's not rigid. It doesn't stick in place. Okay. If revolution is the transformation of the conditions of society, then anarchism is a society where the people perpetually have the ability to carry out a transformation of conditions. So they're the power is in their hands. Whereas revolution previous to anarchism has been characterized by the need to create, a radical constituency which will overthrow the previous way of things while building a replacement structure. Under anarchism, you won't need that anymore because the people just have the power now. And so if they want to change society, they can simply vote to change society. They can essentially arrive upon consensus to change conditions. And so revolution is no longer something that will require a violent revolutionary transition, a violent revolt, but will instead be something which can be carried out organically, perpetually, repeatedly by the people of that society. So this is kind of related then to what Trotsky was talking about. Knowledge and Defense says, what the hell did Trotsky mean when he wrote about a permanent revolution? Isn't this the same guy who crushed Kronstadt? Also, is communalism just eco-anarchism, or am I mixing things up? Yeah, I mean, this is kind of similar to Trotsky's conception of permanent revolution. That is to say, you never stay at a certain point and say, and we're done, we're going to stay here for a long time. You're in a constant process of trying to proceed forward, to revolutionize the conditions of society. This is one of those rare Trotsky W's. I agree with him. Although, as you say, hilariously contradictory considering he crushed Kronstadt, which was a perfect example of permanent revolution. But this is an example of how it doesn't matter what the ideology of the rulers is. The power structure itself creates all of the conditions for destruction of a new society being born. So once a hierarchical power structure is in place, it is a counter-revolutionary force. It doesn't matter if Trotsky writes books about permanent revolution. Once Trotsky is put into a position in a hierarchical power structure, he will be a counter-revolutionary. And it's true for anybody that is in a hierarchical power structure, because hierarchical power is counter-revolutionary. As far as communalism being eco-anarchism, I mean, kind of. I would just go read Bookchin's piece called What is Communalism? And he'll just tell you what communalism is. It's like eco-anarchism, yes, but then it has some very specific beliefs that I personally do not agree with, which is to say, like, it believes in majoritarianism. I'm not super down with that. So, yeah. So I've been going now for a few hours. I think I'm coming close to the end. It's been 3 hours. I'm also getting kind of short of breath here, which means I probably need to take it easy. I guess as I'm kind of coming to a close, I just remind people that if you appreciate the work that I'm doing on this channel, please go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark. There are all kinds of different tiers: $2, $5, $7, $10, $20. They all get you access to the Discord server. All you got to do is go in there and like sync up your Discord password and username and all that, and it'll just give you an auto invite to the server. If that doesn't work, send me a DM on Patreon and I'll send you an invite link to that. But yeah, so coming around to the end here. Confused Lefty, you said some anarchist predicted USSR's fate way before the October Revolution. Who was that? Bakunin. And I cite the passages where Bakunin almost is like literally describing the USSR before it ever existed in my work, The State is Counter-Revolutionary. I highly recommend everyone go read or watch The State is Counter-Revolutionary. I will warn you ahead of time, the music's not very well adjusted. It's a little bit loud, but hopefully you can tolerate it. I'll just link you first to part 1. Here you go. Steve McNally gives me $20 for the message. Thanks, Dan. Even if you did get me out of bed at 4 a.m., you woke up out of bed at 4 a.m. for this? Wow. I personally could not wake up at 4 a.m. I don't think I have the constitution for that. So yeah, there in the chat, I linked part 1 of The State is Counter-Revolutionary. However, I should note it's also on the Anarchist library. So if you just want to go read it, it's also there. There's also a version for those of you who just want to listen, that don't want the music, which I get it, audio processing disorder and so on. In the description for all of those videos is a link to the Spotify, because I have a Spotify, where just my voiceover is. It's just my voiceover. It has no music. And so that should be way more listenable. So Spirit of the Tall Hills, I've seen you ask that a few times. You say, just want to ask with St. Patrick's Day around the corner, of your opinions on Irish republicanism, and have you read Oscar Wilde's The Soul of Man Under Socialism? I don't know enough about Irish republicanism to make a comment. That's the reason I didn't respond. I support the Irish people in their liberatory struggle against, colonization and essentially being, settled by the British. However, I would say it's not very anarchic. It's not very horizontal. It has much more authoritarian leanings. So that is to say, even though I support them, I don't think that what they would be able to produce is socialism. I think they would produce state capitalism in the process. Nonetheless, I still support them. The same with the Palestinians, even though I think that what they're asking for is not going to actually lead to the liberation of the Palestinians. It will possibly lead to the end of Irish settler colonialism, which is a step forward. The same way that I support the USSR as compared to Tsarist Russia, yet do not consider the USSR socialist. The other part, have I read Oscar Wilde's The Soul of Man Under Socialism? Yes, really good essay, short enough for most people to read pretty quick, and very profound. It's worth a read for sure. And I got another $10 from Ryan. Thank you so much. He says, thanks again. And of course, absolutely. I mean, I am glad to do these for you. To do these live streams, produce material for the channel and so on. I'm glad that you all appreciate the work that I'm doing. Do I condemn the IRA? No, I do not condemn the IRA. Absolutely not. Spirit of the Tall Hills. Yes, I mean Israeli settler colonialism. I'm not sure what I said out loud. I don't know what I said. Did I say Irish settler colonialism? Oops. If that's what I said, I don't remember. I said Irish settler colonialism in Palestine. Wow. I mangled that sentence. Israeli settler colonialism in Palestine. That's what I meant. Panos Roussis asks the question, philosophy question, on the problem of universals. Are you a realist or a nominalist? And if a nominalist, what kind? We're going to type in, I'm probably a universal realist. Let's find out. Let's see here. What was the specific? It was the problem of universals. Let's type it in, problem of universals. Realist or nominalist. The realists are supposed to be those who assert the existence of real universals. Yes, there are absolutely universals. I am what you might call a structural realist. I believe that there is a structure to reality, regardless of whether we have perfect access to it, and that we, through our efforts of attempting to learn more and more about the world, come closer and closer to understanding that real structure of reality, regardless of whether we have done a perfect job of understanding it or not. So then probably that bears on the answer to that question. John Doe, you are incorrect. Capitalism is not by definition the private ownership of the means of production. Capitalism is a system that is defined by the wage relation, exploitation of labor, which is to say extraction of surplus value, the commodity form, the usage of markets in order to create this surplus value. It is not defined by private ownership of the means of production. That is why state capitalism is called state capitalism, and why it was always known that the state could indeed engage in behaviors of capitalism. Capitalism is not defined as the private ownership of the means of production. I think I've seen you misinforming people numerous times about that. That's false. You're wrong. Wow. Here at the end of the stream, Sillon 1999 gave $50 saying, "Hey Anark, it was my birthday a few weeks ago. Have a drink on me. I finished reading The Ecology of Freedom recently, and while I admire Bookchin, I want to stay objective, and I would love to hear your critiques of his ideas." I mean, off the bat, at the very beginning, he speculates a lot about the state of, pre-literate and prehistoric societies. And it's speculation that is kind of spotty. Some of it has remained true as per most modern anthropological data, and some of it has not stood up super well. So I think that's one of the main problems. I also don't know if I agree with Bookchin that ethics is a purely human affair and that there's no such thing as ethics in nature, that humans have the unique capability of having an ethical system, and that so I might be more towards Kropotkin than Bookchin on that one. But yeah, I think those are the main things, but I'd be super down if you had like specifics that you wanted information on to answer specifics. Got another donation. Y'all are just like, I mean, maybe I should just keep on going all day if you're just going to keep loading me down with all these donations here. Sam gives one last $5 donation. He says, "Okay, last one. Talk about veterans and leftist spaces in the U.S. Aaron and the issues at large." Let's see. So it is important that we are able to integrate veterans into leftist spaces. There are a lot of reasons for that. I've heard a lot of people on the left try to compare veterans to the police. And what they say is, if you believe in ACAB, you should believe that all soldiers are bastards as well. I think there is an aspect of truth to this, and there's a problem with that. Okay. The aspect of truth is the reason why all cops are bastards is because the system makes them bastards. The things they are forced to do means that they are harmful to society. They do damage to society, regardless of whether some individual one or another of them isn't so bad, okay? The policing itself is damaging. And in that same sense, soldiers do that same thing. Systemically, soldiers, they are doing damage to the world for the most part. Very little of the deployment that our soldiers do in the society actually helps anyone, either domestically or abroad. There's very few exceptions, but rarely. For the most part, the holding of a standing army by a capitalist entity, by hierarchical power structures, is a net negative, and that systemic function is bad. However, there's a big key difference between the police and the veterans. And that is, the police are not contractually obligated to give away their life for a span of several years, where if they decided to quit, they would be held in a federal prison. That is a big difference, okay? Soldiers, I mean, this is in the United States, I'll at least make this commentary. Soldiers are essentially slaves. They are people who have entered into an indentured slavery contract, okay? And that cannot be compared to police officers who willingly enter into an employment contract that they can sever at any time. Police could just quit. Veterans cannot just quit. Okay. If veterans quit and they don't go through a process of being conscientious objectors, which is, a possible thing they can do, but is not easy. Okay. Then they are stuck for the rest of their service. Okay. Number one. Number two, you can see a vast difference in the development of a radical consciousness within the police and veterans, okay? The police don't develop a radical consciousness. If anything, they develop an anti-radical consciousness. Veterans often do develop a radical consciousness. They see the most brutal, bloody, disgusting applications of force by the empire face to face. They see that war is a racket, and they see that they are gangsters for capitalism, okay? And this is a radicalizing prospect. So if we as leftists are not able to integrate these people who have been radicalized by their indentured servitude to a capitalist empire, people who are no longer down with what they did, that never would have joined if they would have known what they were getting involved in, and who are now completely anti-imperial, who are completely anti the United States, and these people want to bring to us skills and knowledge about how to do war, about how to resist this empire, and so on, and our spaces are over here wringing our hands and purity testing because these people used to be soldiers and not trying to integrate them into our spaces, we are fools. Okay? No revolutionary war has ever been won without veterans. It just can't. You need people that know how to do systemic violence. You need people that know how to do military violence. Okay? And the truth of it is, you don't learn how to do that unless you are put in the position of either enacting that violence by a force that wants you to enact violence, or you are taught how to enact that violence by people who have done it or who have been taught themselves. Okay. So we absolutely have to be able to integrate veterans into our spaces, much as we might dislike the horrifying machine that they were part of before they left the military. The other one was from Ex Orpheus for $10 or $9, says, "Hey, Anark, what's your opinion on the scholarly works arguing for nonviolent resistance by Maria Stefan, Eric Chenoweth, and Gene Sharp? I haven't read enough of them to have a strong opinion on that," which I know is a disappointing answer when you gave me money, but I don't want to pretend I know more than I do. That being said, nonviolent resistance has never created a revolution that has actually transformed conditions of society. Now, what it might do is lead to the end of a dictatorship and the production of a neoliberal capitalism or of a liberal capitalist dynamic. There are lots of examples of that to my knowledge, but you're going to have to do violence if you want to transform society. It's not like you should be eager about it. It sucks. None of us want to do violence. It sounds terrible and it's disgusting things to be involved in. But unfortunately, there will come a time where this power structure will try to crush us. Okay? Either domestically or abroad, the hierarchical power will recognize the threat of what we are trying to bring about and it will try to destroy us. So I'd be down to read those, though. I'm not like ideologically opposed to reading those materials. And I've actually thought about reading something by Gene Sharp. So that's one that I would definitely consider, Gene Sharp. Yeah, Legend Link brings up another point. I think numerous people have brought it up here in the chat. It's not only that, but it's also that we have what you would call a poverty draft. Our recruiters for the military focus specifically on trying to find people that are young and ignorant and idealistic that they can bamboozle into joining this horrifying war machine. And that's another aspect that has to be understood. That is not nearly as prolific with the police. It's just a different process. And even though I agree with, once again, there's all that aspect of it that I agree with. Our military are the police of the world. They're the world police, but those people become part of the military in a very different process, and they are enslaved to the military through a very different process than police officers who are just employed and could literally just leave anytime they like. Yeah. All right. I think I'm going to have to call it here. I appreciate y'all and clearly have some incentive to stick around because you keep giving me donations as I stay. But my voice is getting tired. I'm getting kind of out of breath here, and I think I've about reached my end for today. We have gone on for about, where's my run time? What is it? 3 hours. 3 hours. And this was a really good one, everyone. I really appreciate y'all for coming to the stream and sticking around. I think I might have hit more concurrent viewers on this stream than any one before. Also, I think there are definitely a bunch of clips that I'm going to get out of this one. I probably should have been saying this the whole time, but I just want to emphasize to those of you who are still listening, got 147 of you here, okay? If you go back and you listen to this, please, in the comments below, timestamp the rants that you think were the good ones, because those will become releases, clips for my Monday releases. Okay. That's what my whole plan is. I'm going to stream on the first Friday of the month. then I am going to clip that up and release those little clips on Mondays in between. So seems like you could use some anarcho-restism. Yeah, that's what's about to happen. Anyway, please go below if you're listening and go timestamp the parts that you thought were great and would make good little clips to release on Mondays. But that's it, everybody. I think I'm done for the day. I appreciate y'all coming to the stream. I'll see y'all next time.